Chapter 38:38. Lin, he had already made up his mind to leave the scene as soon as possible. After all, he had suffered serious injuries from the super vital energy bomb, and the vital energy in his body had been exhausted because he had used too much vital energy jet before. No matter how he thought about it, it was better for Lin E to leave as soon as possible. After all, there was an old saying that of the 36 stratagems, it was best to leave. But there was also an old saying that it was dark under the light. The more dangerous the place was, the safer it was. It was a rare opportunity to deal with Nan Tianyong and Yu Zhe. Lin, he was not willing to let it go. Even if he was not in a good state, he could still observe the situation and wait for an opportunity. So Lin, he turned back halfway and saw Yu Zhe's every move from afar. He just followed from afar and did not show himself. "Huh, you want to frame me with this? Isn't this scheme a little too clever?" Lin, he smiled coldly and shook his head. At this moment, he was holding a phone from the secular world, and this phone had recorded the entire scene of Yu Zhe killing his master. It was difficult for high-tech products from the secular world to be brought to Heaven Island. Even if they could be brought up through the teleportation array, they would inevitably be destroyed by the pressure. Especially something as sophisticated as a phone, it was impossible to use normally. But Lin, he had a cheat like the space in the Jade Pendant. It was difficult for other people to bring up high-tech products intact, but it was not a problem for Lin E. Of course, things like a phone were almost useless to cultivators, especially in a place like Heaven Island. It was useless without a signal. Lin, he did not intend to bring it up, but he had long been used to putting everything on him in the space in the Jade Pendant. This time, he brought the phone up. It was purely a convenience. Not only the phone, but even the charger was stored in the space in the Jade Pendant. Back in the secular world, it was to keep in touch with the girls and his underlings at all times. He had specially asked someone to configure a solar power bank. Ever since he came to Heaven Island, although the mobile phone had lost its call function, it was still a habit of modern urbanites. There were photos of all the women stored in it. Lin would often charge it and flip through it to take a look, even though he couldn't meet them for the time being, and many of them were still unconscious. But when he had nothing to do, he would look at these photos to remind himself of the person. It was also a form of motivation for him to improve his strength. Lin, he didn't expect this habit to come in handy at a time like this. He was able to secretly record the scene of Yu Zhe killing Nan Tianyong. Lin, he was surprised by such a huge harvest. With such a video in their hands, it was equivalent to holding onto Yu Zhe's fatal weakness. Even if this guy really made a big deal out of it, Yu Zhe wouldn't be able to escape. In the future, in front of Lin E, he would not be able to cause any more trouble. If Lin E really wanted to deal with him, he wouldn't even need to make a move. All he had to do was show the video. Nan Tianyong's two brothers would definitely take the initiative to do it for him. The name of the three heroes of the Nan family had spread throughout the three pavilions. Nan Tianyong was ranked last, and his strength was also the weakest. However, he was already an expert at the peak of the late stage of the Foundation establishment realm. He was in charge of the important position of Soaring Pavilion's supervising deacon. As for his two brothers, it could be imagined that they were even more unfathomable. With the strength and status of these two people, if they really let them know that Yu Zhe, their disciple, had personally killed Nan Tianyong, then even if Yu Zhe fled to the ends of the earth, he wouldn't be able to escape from their pursuit. Although cultivators are powerful, ordinary people in the secular world aren't completely useless. High-tech things really can't be underestimated. Lin E smiled. When the time comes, this matter would really be exposed. Yu Zhe, this guy would never have thought that he would fall in the hands of ordinary people's high-tech. However, Lin E didn't intend to release this video so easily. Although he and Yu Zhe wouldn't rest until one of them was dead. And if he released it like this, he would definitely be able to kill Yu Zhe. However, this would also easily expose his own identity, and even the secret of the space in the Jade Pendant. After all, ordinary people would directly associate something like a cell phone with the secular world, and the people who had the deepest relationship with the secular world could only be Lin E and the other newcomers who had been teleported up from the secular world. It should be known that the last time a newcomer from the secular world was teleported up was already 1,000 years ago. At that time, there was no such thing as a cell phone at all. Looking at the entire northern island of the Heaven Stage Island, the only people who might have a cell phone on them were Lin, E, and the others. Lin Yi's identity would be easily exposed if someone came to investigate, and Yuja would be able to guess that he was Lin Air. Not only would the secret of the star Inkstone be exposed, but the fact that he'd brought the phone up undamaged would also cause people to investigate him. Lin wouldn't be able to stop them even if he wanted to. Putting the cell phone back into the space in the jade pendant, Lin E smiled faintly, then turned around and returned to the welcome pavilion. Before waiting for a suitable opportunity, he would temporarily let Yuja jump around. The higher he jumped, the harder he would fall. Returning to the welcome pavilion, the only thing Lin E had to do next was to continue nurturing the two awakened heart-devouring exquisite grass seeds in the space in the jade pendant until they finally matured. Only then could they be used to refine the foundation-building pill. Once he successfully refined the foundation-building pill for Lin E, it also meant that he was not far from the middle stage of the foundation-building realm. Apart from that, the newcomer challenge was in full swing. In the eyes of other newcomers, it was an important life event that determined their future, but for Lin E, it was almost completely a side event. Apart from the points that Cha Wu had given him at the beginning, no one dared to challenge him afterward. Looking at all the newcomers in the Blue Cloud Pavilion, the only one who could have an impact on him was Meng Tong. Although he had previously deduced that young Master Su and Meng Jiuguang would not give up so easily, it was a fact that Meng Tong had not shown his strength for a long time. With Lin Yi's golden finger, as long as there was the slightest change in Meng Tong's strength, he would be able to detect it immediately. In reality, Meng Tong's strength did not change at all. Even after he recovered from his injuries, he did not challenge Xiao Ran and Xiao Honkai again. Instead, he just followed behind them and took advantage of the situation. His cowardly behavior was completely different from Meng Tong's previous behavior. All the newcomers were discussing it, and the rumor had even developed into Lin Yi's group, dominating the situation. Meng Jiuguang, the big senior brother, was helpless. As for Meng Tong, naturally, he could only admit defeat. Chapter 38-39. Lin E and the others, on the other hand, felt a strange pressure from the silence. The longer the opponent held back, the fiercer the backlash would be. However, the opponent did not move. Due to the ranking of the cave dwelling, Lin E and the others could not take the initiative to cause trouble for Meng Tong. They could only wait. That being said, no matter how fast Meng Tong improved, with Lin Yi's strength, there was no need to take him seriously. While Lin Yi was wholeheartedly cultivating the heart-devouring exquisite grass. As expected, after Yuja carried Nan Tianyong's corpse back, the entire Soaring Sky Pavilion was in an uproar. After all, Nan Tianyong was not an ordinary person. He was the supervising deacon of the Soaring Sky Pavilion. Such a key person was killed in the territory of the three great pavilions. This was simply a provocation to the Soaring Sky Pavilion. It was impossible not to cause a commotion. Before the upper echelons of the Soaring Sky Pavilion could react, Yuja had already found one of Nan Tianyong's two elder brothers, the second brother, Southern Sky Gate. According to Yuja's plan, he originally wanted to invite Nan Tianyong's two elder brothers, who were also his two martial uncles. Unfortunately, the eldest of the three Nan family heroes, Nan Tianba, was on a mission in the Outer Islands. Now, only the second brother, Southern Sky Gate, was left on the northern island of the Heaven Stage Island. However, even if it was only Southern Sky Gate, with his strength and position that was above Nan Tianyong's, it was more than enough for him to cause a commotion. One had to know that Southern Sky Gate's strength was even higher than Nan Tianyong's. However, to Yuja's surprise, after seeing Nan Tianyong's corpse, Southern Sky Gate, the second brother of the same mother, did not have any expression of grief. Instead, he had a cold smile on his face. Third brother, this guy, is stupid and has a bad temper. Furthermore, his strength is so weak. When the eldest brother pushed this trash into the position of supervising deacon, I already knew that something bad would happen. As expected, Southern Sky Gate's face was filled with ruthless ridicule. There was not the slightest bit of brotherhood between them. Yuja was instantly stunned. He was originally a little worried that the other party would investigate too much and find traces of his sword chi on Nan Tianyong's corpse. Although the sword chi wound on his chest was very similar to the other wounds caused by Jin Chi, if someone really compared it carefully, they would still be able to find something fishy. But now, Yuja realized that he had been worrying in the wrong direction. With the South Heaven Gate's attitude, it was impossible for them to care about how their chief master, Nan Tianyong, had died. Why did this useless third brother only die now? On the other hand, what Yuja needed to worry about the most was whether his second brother, the Southern Sky Gate, would stand up for his chief master. If the Southern Heavenly Gate did not do anything about Nan Tianyong's death, then it would be difficult for Yuja to make use of this opportunity to blow the matter up. The Southern Heavenly Gate was Nan Tianyong's older brother. If even a close relative like him did not stand up and say anything, then even if the upper echelons of the Soaring Sky Pavilion were forced to intervene, they would not pay much attention to this matter. In this way, Yuja wanted to use Nan Tianyong's death to alarm the three great pavilions and the law enforcement hall. Thus, it would be a little unrealistic to force out Lin Yi's purpose in the end. Just when Yuja was racking his brains, not knowing how to persuade the other party to stand up for his chief master, the Southern Heavenly Gate took the initiative to speak. However, although I don't like the useless third brother, no matter what, he is still a member of our Nan family's three heroes. If we let him be killed like this, the three heroes of the Nan family's face will be completely lost. Moreover, when Boss comes back in the future, I won't be able to explain it to him. The Southern Heavenly Gate shook his head impatiently. After pondering for a moment, the Southern Heavenly Gate reluctantly stood up from the armchair. Forget it. No matter what, we are brothers. I'll have to work a little harder and go with you. Marshal Nephew, who did you say killed this piece of trash? Hearing this, Yuja was stunned, then hurriedly replied, it was a rogue cultivator called Lin Air. Rogue cultivator? The Southern Heavenly Gate glanced at Yuja and couldn't help but ask suspiciously, although this third brother of mine is a bit of trash, he is still a member of our Nan family's three heroes, and his strength has barely reached the peak of the Foundation establishment late stage. How could he be killed by a mere rogue cultivator? Looking at the 5 great islands of Heaven stage, although there were many grassroots rogue cultivators, because of the lack of cultivation resources, they were generally the weakest at the bottom. There were very few experts, especially experts at the peak of the Foundation establishment late stage, which could be counted on one's fingers. Nan Tianyong was actually killed by a mere rogue cultivator in the territory of the 3 great pavilions. The possibility of this happening was almost zero. To kill an expert at the peak of the Foundation establishment late stage and not even give him a chance to escape, this person's strength had to be at least at the peak of the Foundation establishment late stage. How could it be easy to find such an expert among the rogue cultivators? Yuja hurriedly nodded. Marshal Uncle, I also feel that it is very unbelievable that Lin Air was able to kill Master. However, he is indeed a rogue cultivator who appeared out of nowhere, and on the surface, his strength is only at the peak of the Foundation establishment early stage. Peak of the Foundation establishment early stage? When the Southern Heavenly Gate heard this, he directly spat out a mouthful of tea in Yuja's face. He glared at him with a pair of triangular eyes and said with ill intentions, "Are you fucking lying to me? Are you tired of living?" Normally, even if it was an expert of the same level, because of the natural disadvantage of cultivation resources, a grassroots rogue cultivator would often not be a match for a sect cultivator like the 3 great pavilions. In other words, even if the opponent was an expert at the peak of the Foundation establishment late stage, it would be very difficult for him to defeat Nan Tianyong, let alone a peak of the Foundation establishment early stage. Even if the opponent really had the strength to challenge someone of a higher level, he would at most be able to surpass 1 level. Although it was still very rare for a late-stage Foundation establishment late-stage expert to counterattack and kill a peak late-stage foundation establishment late-stage expert. It was not completely unacceptable. If a mere rogue cultivator at the peak of the foundation establishment early stage was able to kill a peak late-stage foundation establishment late-stage expert like Nantian Yong, no one would believe such nonsense, not even a ghost. It was normal for the Southern Heavenly Gate to have such a reaction. Yuja had already expected this, so he could only smile bitterly as he wiped the tea off his face and hurriedly explained, "Marshal uncle, don't be agitated. I also don't believe that this Lin heir is only at the peak of the foundation establishment early stage. It's just that this person might have hidden his strength, and with my eyesight, I can't see through his strength." Chapter 3840. The cultivation world never lacked methods to hide one's strength. Some are very simple and could be easily seen through with a little bit of attention. However, there were also some that could be hidden very well and could be said to be impeccable. If a high-level cultivator purposely hid his strength, it wouldn't be difficult for someone stronger than him to see through him. However, if someone weaker than him, it would be very difficult. According to the Southern Sky Gate's judgment, if the opponent was able to kill Nantian Yong, then the opponent should at least have the strength of the late stage of the foundational level, or even higher. With Yuja's mid-stage foundational level strength, it was normal for him to not be able to see through the opponent's disguise. Sherbois is wise. However, in this disciple's opinion, that brat's strength cannot compare to Master's. It was just that he exploded a great killing weapon, and Master was caught off guard. That was why he killed her in one move. Otherwise, that guy would be far from being Master's match. Yuja analyzed with a sorrowful expression. He had no idea what Lin Yi's true strength was. However, from the first time they fought, even if Lin Yi was stronger than him, it wasn't by much. This time, the reason why his cheap master Nantian Yong was tricked was because he underestimated his opponent. He didn't even use any martial skills and was directly thrown in the face by the killer weapon. That's why he died in one move. Of course, Nantian Yong didn't need to die. However, with such a cruel and unscrupulous disciple like Yuja, it was hard for him to not die. Killer weapon? The Southern Sky Gate's expression changed slightly, and he said with interest, "Marshal nephew, why don't you tell me in detail? What kind of killer weapon was it, to be able to kill third brother in one move?" The martial world was dangerous, and the cultivation world was a place where the weak were prey to the strong. Any cultivator with a bit of strength would have their own trump card. However, some were useful, while others were not. Some were ordinary, while others were heaven-defying. Regardless, since it could be used as a trump card, then, compared to normal martial skills, there must be something special about it. As for the Southern Sky Gate, he was always interested in other people's trump cards. It wasn't because he was very curious, but because the cultivation technique he cultivated was very special. It was called the Lesser Formless Technique. In the cultivation world of Heaven Stage Island, there were 5 cultivation techniques that were widely known due to their powerful and heaven-defying effects. Moreover, they were highly respected, and almost all cultivators flocked to them. History had proven countless times that anyone who could obtain any one of them would have a high chance of ascending to the top in the future. These 5 techniques were collectively known as the 5 Great Divine Techniques. Among the 5 Great Divine Arts, there was a cultivation method called the non-phase divine art. According to legend, as long as one had this divine art, then using any martial skill would be a piece of cake. Even if he had never focused on cultivating, he would be able to imitate it with just a little experience, and its power would not be inferior to that of the original. This formless divine art, apart from being able to imitate anyone's martial technique, furthermore, it had an even more heaven-defying effect, which was that it could slowly merge the essence of the various martial skills that it had imitated. It became a brand new non-phase divine skill. In other words, this non-phase divine skill was a collection of the essence of 100 schools of thought. In theory, it was a super powerful martial skill that could continuously evolve and become stronger. This heaven-defying effect alone was enough to instantly defeat any martial skill. In the entire 5 Great Divine Islands, the number of cultivators who had the talent and the opportunity to cultivate the non-phase divine art could be counted on one hand. However, the minor non-phase divine art that the Southern Heaven Gate cultivated was not the original non-phase divine art. It was a simplified version that had been modified by an expert. Its effect was not as heaven-defying as the original non-phase divine art, but it still had the same effect, just that it was greatly weakened. The minor non-phase divine art could not fully replicate other martial skills. Even if it did, its power would be slightly weaker than the original version. Furthermore, unlike the original version, the minor non-phase divine art was not able to perfectly merge the essences of various martial skills and improve them infinitely. There were many limitations. That being said, the minor non-phase divine art was still an incredible art that far surpassed ordinary martial skills. There were not many people who had the opportunity to cultivate the minor non-phase divine art. The reason why the Southern Heaven Gate was able to acquire the minor non-phase divine art was not only because he was fortunate enough, but also because the 3 heroes of the Nan clan had a strong backer on the Middle Island. Chapter 38-41. Next, not only did he want to steal the Star Ink Stone from Lin Yi, he also wanted to become Southern Sky Gate's disciple and obtain the minor phaseless technique. With these 2 things to rely on, he would have the chance to become the strongest Golden Core expert in the future. He, Yuzha, was not willing to be an ordinary nobody. Think about it. He even dared to do something like killing his own master, something that angered even the gods. What could stop him in the future? That being said, the difficulty of obtaining the minor phaseless magic from the South Heaven Gate was even higher than retrieving the Star Ink Stone from Lin Air, who had appeared out of nowhere. Unlike the simple-minded Nan Tianyong, the second brother of the 3 heroes of the Nan clan, Nan Tianmin, was extremely shrewd. Furthermore, from his reaction towards Nan Tianyong's death, it was obvious that he was a cold-hearted person. In fact, he could even be described as ruthless. No matter how bad his relationship with Nan Tianyong was, they were still brothers from the same mother. However, not only did he not feel the slightest bit sad about Nan Tianyong's death, he even seemed to be taking pleasure in Nan Tianyong's misfortune. If it wasn't for the face of the Nan clan's 3 heroes, he wouldn't even have asked about it. With such a temperament, Yuzha, who had killed his own master, could be said to be jackals of the same tribe. To numb such a troublesome person and obtain the minor phaseless technique from him was as difficult as ascending to the heavens. However, a technique like the minor phaseless technique was too rare. No matter how difficult it was, as long as there was a small chance, Yuzha would not give up easily. This was similar to the Star Ink Stone, a technique that could change one's fate. However, its effect might not be as heaven-defying as the Star Ink Stone. Yuzha knew that to obtain the minor phaseless technique, he had to first make Southern Sky Gate accept him as a disciple. If he wanted Southern Sky Gate to accept him as a disciple, then he had to curry favor with Southern Sky Gate and gain his recognition. Hearing Southern Sky Gate's question, Yuzha was silent for a moment. Only then did he reply, reporting to Marshal Uncle. Although I was present when Master was killed, because I was quite far away, and because Lin Air's attack was extremely sinister and covert, I didn't see it too clearly. I only know that the move seemed to have condensed an unimaginable amount of chi, and the power of the explosion in an instant even caused the surrounding mountains to collapse, leaving behind a huge crater. The scene was extremely shocking. Really? The Southern Heavenly Gate couldn't help but be taken aback when he heard this. In recent years, the 3 great pavilions have sent a lot of people to set up layers of protective arrays in every territory, especially in a place like the market, where all kinds of people are mixed together. In order to prevent cultivators from fighting and destroying the surroundings, they have specially arranged several layers of protective arrays. It is impossible for an ordinary person to destroy the surrounding mountains. Although the Foundation establishment stage could only be regarded as a beginner on the Heavenly Stage Island, it was still a heaven-defying cultivator who sees the fortune of heaven and earth. If they really had to use their full strength, they would not be able to do so. Even a random early-stage foundation establishment expert could easily destroy a mountain range. There were so many experts on Heaven Stage Island, and there were all kinds of conflict happening all the time. If there were no corresponding protective measures, the island would be destroyed. The 5 Heaven Islands had already been smashed to pieces, so how could they have been passed down for millions of years? The reason why the 5 Heaven-ranked islands were able to remain standing was due to the various sections. It was they who set up layers of protective arrays everywhere on Heaven Stage Island to offset the damage caused by the battle between cultivators, which allowed Heaven Stage Island to continue to exist until today. Take the protective arrays set up around the market by the 3 great pavilions as an example. Due to the gathering of people in the market, almost all the cultivators on the North Island were gathered here, not just the disciples of the 3 great pavilions. All kinds of conflicts were unavoidable every day. If it wasn't for special measures, this place would have been destroyed long ago. The protective arrays around the market had always been the tightest, and the defensive power had always been the strongest. Even a full blow from an early-stage foundation establishment stage expert would not be able to leave any marks around it. What kind of power was needed to destroy all the mountains around the market with a single move? Even an expert at the peak of the late stage of the foundation establishment realm might not be able to do this. That's true, and according to Disciple's observation, that Lin Air himself doesn't seem to be able to control such a powerful killer move. He can only throw it out, and he can't maximize the lethality at all. Yuja pondered for a moment. Logically speaking, since the power of Lin Yi's killer move was so terrifying that it could overwhelm the protective arrays and destroy all the surrounding mountains, it should be easy to kill Nan Tianyong, a peak late-stage foundation establishment stage expert, with such great power. However, although Nan Tianyong was caught off guard and was seriously injured, he did not die on the spot. If Yuja hadn't killed him out of greed, Nan Tianyong would have been alive and kicking at this moment. Yuja's speculation could be said to be reasonable, and it was indeed as he had speculated. Lin Yi couldn't completely control the true energy bomb, especially the super true energy bomb that he had been holding for an entire hour. Hearing Yuja's words, the smile on Southern Sky Gate's face couldn't help but deepen. Interesting. Using a killer move that he can't even completely control, he was able to jump levels and kill number 3. I'm more and more interested in this Lin Air you mentioned. Yuja secretly smiled. It was good that he was interested. Otherwise, if this guy wasn't interested at all, how would he dig out this Lin Air for him? As expected, Southern Sky Gate immediately took the initiative to ask, since that Lin Air is a loose cultivator, then Marshall Nephew, do you know how to find it? Grassroot loose cultivators were not like the disciples of the 3 great pavilions. They rarely had a unique cultivation cave and often didn't have a fixed place to live. Unless one was especially familiar with them, it would be as difficult as ascending to the heavens to find them. Reporting to Marshall Uncle, Disciple has been looking for him these days. I've been thinking of various ways, but I still haven't been able to dig him out. The reason why I was able to meet him in the market was purely by accident. Yuja replied respectfully. This is a bit troublesome. Southern Sky Gate couldn't help but frown. Even if the opponent had a killer move that could instantly kill Nan Tianyong, if he personally made a move, it wouldn't be a problem. However, how to find the opponent as soon as possible. This was the biggest problem. Chapter 3842. Even if it was only due to the pressure of public opinion, the higher-ups of the Soaring Pavilion would definitely take action. At that time, the experts of the Law Enforcement Hall would inevitably be involved. Not to mention the fact that everyone knew about the 3 heroes of the Nan clan. Once Nan Tianyong died, the other 2 heroes would definitely seek revenge. With so many people watching him, unless there was something wrong with Lin Air's brain, there was no way he would continue to swagger around the market. If he didn't take the initiative to show himself, it would be easier said than done. Seeing this, Yuja carefully suggested, Marshall Uncle, although this disciple doesn't know this Lin Second's exact background. According to what this disciple knows, he seems to be acquainted with the manager of the Hong Merchant Group in the Inner Street, Hong Zhong. We should be able to find out some useful information from him. Oh, Marshal Nephew, are you sure? This loose cultivator actually knows the shopkeeper of the Hong Clan Merchant Association? That's not simple. Southern Sky Gate was slightly stunned. Unlike King Nan Yong, who had been in seclusion for the past few years, Southern Sky Gate was very clear about the weight of the Hong Clan Merchant Association. It was truly a colossus. Even if he was only the shopkeeper of the North Island branch, he would still be an incredible figure. For a mere loose cultivator like Lin Air to be acquainted with the shopkeeper of the Hong Clan Merchant Association, in the eyes of a knowledgeable person like Southern Sky Gate, this news was even more shocking than him instantly killing Nan Tianyong. Yuzha nodded in confirmation. Although I don't know how close these two are, according to my speculation, Hong Zhong seems to have given Lin Air a Spirit Jade card recently. This conjecture was purely the conclusion that Yuzha came up with after much thought. Even though it was a little groundless, this person's brain was good, and he really guessed the whole story. The basis of his speculation was the 3 times he and Lin met in the Inner Street. The first time, the two of them took advantage of the opening day of the Inner Street and saw the Star Inkstone at the Hong Clan Merchant Association. The second time, the two of them met again on the opening day of the Inner Street a month later. At the same time, they rushed to the Hong Clan Merchant Association to compete for the Star Inkstone. From this, it could be seen that Lin definitely didn't have a Spirit Jade card on him, nor did he have the right to freely enter and exit the Inner Street. He would definitely buy the Star Inkstone before this happened. The third time, it was not the opening day of the Inner Street. Yuzha was able to enter the Inner Street completely because of the Spirit Jade card in the hands of his cheapskate master, Nan Tianyong. However, what surprised him the most was that he actually met Lin for the third time at the Hong Merchant Association. When the Inner Street was not open to the public, there were only 2 types of people who could freely enter and exit the Inner Street. One was the disciples of the 3 great pavilions whose status and strength were recognized by the market, and the other was the VIP who held the Spirit Jade card. Yuzha had been buried in the library for the past 3 years. However, he knew all the famous people in the 3 great pavilions like the back of his hand. At the very least, he had never seen Lin Air's face before. Otherwise, with his photographic memory, he would have recognized him the first time he saw him. Since it was not the first one, the only possibility left was the second one. This Lin Air didn't have a Spirit Jade card, but for some reason, after buying the Star Inkstone from the Hong Clan Chamber of Commerce, he suddenly had one. So naturally, Yuzha had this conjecture. Hong Zhong gave Lin Air a Spirit Jade card. Although this matter was a little unimaginable, he knew that Lin Air had something like the Foundation Establishment barrier-breaking pill in his hands. Businessmen always liked rare goods, so it was not difficult to understand why Hong Zhong gave Lin Air a Spirit Jade card because he thought highly of him. Spirit Jade card? Interesting. Even someone at the level of number 3 doesn't have the right to receive a Spirit Jade card. If I remember correctly, this guy went to find Boss to borrow his Spirit Jade card a few days ago. Southern Sky Gate asked with a cold laugh. That's right, the Spirit Jade card can bring another person into the Inner Street. Without this Spirit Jade card, we wouldn't have met Lin Air this time. Yuzha nodded. A piece of trash who can't even get a Spirit Jade card. If he lives, he will only bring shame to our Nan clan. All right, Marshal Nephew, did you find eldest brother's Spirit Jade card on his body? If Boss comes back and finds out that his Spirit Jade card is gone, he will go crazy. Southern Sky Gate frowned. On the 5 great islands of Heaven stage, the Spirit Jade card was the best proof of a person's status. Even the strongest person would value it. Even the boss of the Nan clan's 3 heroes was no exception. Hearing this, Yuzha's heart tightened. The Spirit Jade card that Nan Tianyong borrowed from Boss was now in his hands along with the other treasures that were gathered from Nan Tianyong's body. Although he knew that without the owner's chi, even if he had the Spirit Jade card in his hands, he wouldn't be able to use a single bit of it. This was because to use the Spirit Jade card, one had to input chi and pass through the joint formation of the Merchant Guild. But Yuzha couldn't resist the temptation. The owner of this Spirit Jade card was the boss of the Nan clan's 3 heroes. The number of spirit jades on it was enough to dazzle any cultivator. Yuzha was no exception. It was rumored that as long as he could find the cooperation of a top merchant guild or someone from the merchant guild, even if it was someone else's spirit jade card, there was a way to extract all the spirit jades from it. Therefore, even though he knew that it was dangerous to keep this spirit jade card, Yuzha still couldn't bear to throw it away. The spirit jades in this spirit jade card were enough to surpass the value of all the treasures he found on Nan Tianyong's body. This was something he could rely on in the future. How could he throw it away? Reporting to Martial Uncle, Lin Ayer's killing move was too shocking. Many things on Master's body were lost. After that, it attracted a lot of onlookers from the nearby market. I couldn't care too much and could only steal Master's body. As for Martial Uncle's spirit jade card, I don't know who picked it up in the chaos. Although Yuzha was panicking, he didn't show it on his face and replied calmly. There were truths and lies in his words. Even a smart person like Southern Sky Gate wouldn't be able to determine the truth in such a short amount of time, unless he suspected Yuzha from the beginning and directly searched his body or his cave. Unfortunately, although Southern Sky Gate didn't have a good relationship with Nan Tianyong, he still admired Nan Tianyong's disciple, Yuzha. Chapter 38-43. Now that Nan Tianyong had turned into a corpse, Yuzha had lost his only support. With his intelligence, he definitely knew what to do in order to survive in the Soaring Sky Pavilion. What the Southern Sky Gate needed to do was simple. They needed to test if Yuzha was loyal enough, then decide if they wanted to take him in. If that's the case, then Martial Nephew, get someone to put up a notice in the market. As for whether or not we can get it back, we'll let the boss worry about it when he comes back. The Southern Sky Gate didn't care too much about it. After all, even if they tried their best to get it back, it wouldn't do them any good. They were just mentioning it out of convenience. Yes, disciple understands. Yuzha nodded immediately. The Southern Sky Gate's words were exactly what he wanted. Otherwise, if the other party really wanted to find a spiritual jade card, it would be a huge problem. The Southern Sky Gate paused for a moment, then said, "Then we'll take care of the spiritual jade card. As for Lin Air, since Martial Nephew is sure that he is related to Hong Zhong, it seems like I'll have to pay a visit to the Hong Merchant Guild." Although the Southern Sky Gate didn't care about Nan Tianyong's humiliation at the Hong Merchant Guild, as one of the three heroes of the Nan clan, the news would naturally reach his ears through the mouths of the surrounding flatterers. The Southern Sky Gate's attitude towards this was completely disdainful. As for the third brother, Nan Tianyong, he was even more of an idiot in his eyes. A mere peak late-stage foundation establishment cultivator dared to provoke the Hong Merchant Guild. If that wasn't idiot, then what was? Not to mention Nan Tianyong, even the Southern Sky Gate, whose strength and status were above him, didn't dare to underestimate the enormous Hong Merchant Guild. Nan Tianyong used his strength and status to force the Hong Merchant Guild? What a joke. Saying that he was ignorant was already praising him. He really had a hole in his brain. The Southern Sky Gate was well aware of the enormous power of the Hong Merchant Guild and was extremely afraid of it. However, it wasn't to the point where they didn't dare to have any ideas. No matter what, he was also the second brother of the Nan clan's three heroes. Now that the eldest brother wasn't here, if he didn't care about the death of the third brother, Nan Tianyong, it would be extremely damaging to his reputation. Although the South Heaven Gate was 100 or even 1,000 times smarter than a simple-minded person like Nan Tianyong, he could not help but place great importance on his reputation. Even though he had no interest in the idiot Nan Tianyong hanging in the hands of others, he had no choice but to step forward for the sake of his reputation. What's more, she was different from him, who had a cold temperament. The eldest of the three heroes of the Nan clan, Nan Tianba, was very protective of his own people. Otherwise, he wouldn't have lent something as precious as the Spirit Jade card to Nan Tianyong without any hesitation. Once Nan Tianba returned and found out that his younger brother was indifferent to the death of third brother Nan Tianyong, the Southern Sky Gate could not imagine what kind of rage they would face at that time. A smart person like the Southern Sky Gate would never be so stupid as to threaten him like Nan Tianyong. The reason why he had the confidence to pay a visit to the Hong Merchant Guild was because there was a detail in Yu's words. Lin Er was not valued by the entire Hong Merchant Guild. He was merely valued by Hong Zhong, the manager of the North Island branch of the Hong Merchant Guild. Although it was only a few words different, the meaning behind it was completely different. If this Lin Er, he was an important customer valued by the entire Hong Merchant Guild, then even if the Southern Sky Gate had 10 times the guts, he would never dare to go to the Hong Merchant Guild and threaten them to hand over Lin Er's information. As the second most famous merchant guild on the 5 islands of Heaven rank, the Hong Merchant Guild was extremely protective of their customers, especially the important customers that they valued. They were always extremely protective of them. If Lin Er was this kind of customer, then forget about the Southern Sky Gate. Even if the 3 great pavilions of the North Island came forward to pressure the Hong Merchant Guild, it would be useless. Although businessmen pursued profits and would often resort to unscrupulous means, the main reason why the Hong Merchant Guild was able to become the colossus it was today was because of its reputation. Without a strong reputation, it would be impossible to become a top chamber of commerce. To build such a degree of reputation, it would require years of operation. This process was very long and difficult, but it was very easy to destroy such a strong reputation. As long as they sold information about a customer, even if it was just the simplest identity, once it was spread out, it would be enough to destroy the strong reputation that had been accumulated for thousands of years. Everyone who joined the Hong Merchant Guild, even the lowest manservant, had to go through all kinds of brainwashing every day. The most basic and most important rule was to protect the Hong Merchant Guild's reputation with their lives. However, if Lin Er was only valued by Hong Zhong, then it would be much easier to deal with. Where there were people, there would be conflicts. Even within the Hong Merchant Guild, it was not a monolithic block. If the higher-ups of the Hong Merchant Guild's Middle Island headquarters spoke, then Hong Zhong's position as the representative of the Hong Merchant Guild on the North Island would naturally be gone. The Southern Sky Gate knew very well that if they wanted to pry out Lin Er's identity from Hong Zhong, the first step was to separate Hong Zhong from the Hong Merchant Guild. The Southern Sky Gate did not dare to challenge the Hong Merchant Guild, but if it was only Hong Zhong, then there was still a chance to threaten them. May I ask, Marshal Uncle, when are we going to the Hong Merchant Guild? Although Yu Zhe did not know what the Southern Sky Gate was planning, he still dared to say something like going to the Hong Merchant Guild, even after knowing that Nan Tianyong had suffered a setback. It was obvious that he had something to rely on and his confidence. There's no rush. Let's talk about it in 2 days. Marshal Nephew, you should first send out the notice to search for Boss's spiritual jade card. I need to prepare something and, at the same time, observe the situation. The Southern Sky Gate's expression was unfathomable. He then waved his hand at Yu Zhe, indicating that he could leave. Yes, Marshal Uncle. Yu Zhe did not say anything else and respectfully cowed out. He faced the Southern Sky Gate and carefully retreated to the door, then turned around and left. Looking at Yu Zhe's back as he left, the Southern Sky Gate thoughtfully rubbed his chin and said to himself with a chuckle, "This kid sure pretends to be obedient, but if he wants to win my favor, he's still far from it." 3 days passed by in the blink of an eye. The supervising deacon, Nan Tianyong, was killed in an instant near the market. After 3 days of brewing, this matter had become known to everyone. Not only the disciples of the Soaring Sky Pavilion, but even the disciples of the other 3 pavilions were discussing this matter during their leisure time. Chapter 3844. The market was a place where good and bad mixed together. Not only were there a large number of disciples from the 3 pavilions, but there were also a large number of rogue cultivators. Chapter if the murderer was a disciple from the 3 pavilions, then it would not be difficult to find a real culprit after a little investigation. However, if it was a rogue cultivator, then it would be very difficult to find the culprit. But what was surprising was that Nan Tianyong, a key figure in a key position, was killed in the territory of the 3 great pavilions. Everyone was just discussing it out of boredom, and it didn't cause any strong cries. No one deliberately created public opinion to pressure the higher-ups of the 3 great pavilions to find the real culprit as soon as possible. Nan Tianyong, the supervisor of the Soaring Sky Pavilion, had a poor relationship with others. Because of the widespread attention, the higher-ups of the Soaring Sky Pavilion had already come forward to investigate this matter. The nature of this matter could not be said to be bad. If they did not even care about Nan Tianyong, a person with a high status, being killed in his own territory, then where would the prestige of the Soaring Sky Pavilion be? How would they be able to convince the public in the future? However, although the law enforcement hall had registered this matter, they did not make any targeted big movements. It was rather cold for a period of time. After everyone had forgotten about it, they would put on the shelf. In a world of cultivation that was filled with fighting and killing, the death of a person was a common occurrence. Unless it was a massacre like the one in the Hiawatha Manor where thousands of people died, it would affect the interests of certain people. Only then would a large number of people be involved. This time, if Nan Tianyong's identity as the supervisor of the Soaring Sky Pavilion was not a little sensitive, the higher-ups would not pay attention to him at all. If he died, then he died. There was nothing to be surprised about. However, under the premise that there was no special greeting from the higher-ups, the law enforcement hall was just going through the motions. In the words of the current law enforcement hall master, Ramjia, the law enforcement hall was not bored enough to seek justice for the weak. Only the big figures of the big forces. That was the real target they needed to keep an eye on. In the eyes of most ordinary cultivators, Nan Tianyong was already a high and mighty figure. However, in the eyes of Ramjia, he was no different from ordinary people at the bottom. He was just a lowly ant, and there was no need to waste energy on him. Sure enough, if I want to give boss a satisfactory explanation, I'll have to do it myself. The South Heaven Gate had expected this to happen. After being in the Soaring Sky Pavilion for so long, it was impossible for them to not know what the authorities and the disciplinary hall were like. Then he would have wasted his time. However, he did not wait in vain for the past 3 days. After all, apart from observing the situation, he had to prepare a trump card if he wanted to personally make a trip to the Hong Chamber of Commerce. And now, he had been waiting for this trump card. After calling Yuzha, the Southern Heavenly Gate immediately headed to the market square. However, he was different from Nan Tianyong. He had his own Spirit Jade card, so bringing Yuzha in was not a problem. Arriving in front of the Hong Chamber of Commerce, the Southern Heavenly Gate didn't say a word. With a cold expression, he strode in, while Yuzha followed closely behind. The manservant at the entrance of the Hong Chamber of Commerce immediately sensed that something was wrong. Then, he glanced at Yuzha. He immediately understood. Although he didn't know who the Southern Sky Gate was, Yuzha had been coming to the Hong Chamber of Commerce quite a few times recently. Moreover, the recent disturbances were all because of him. If the manservant still couldn't recognize him, then it would be a waste of the Hong Chamber of Commerce's painstaking training. "Where's your shopkeeper?" The Southern Heavenly Gate did not even look at the manservant. He curled his lips and said condescendingly. The 3 heroes of the Nan family were used to being arrogant. Even as smart as he was no exception. He had never been nice to his subordinates. Furthermore, even if it was for the purpose of coming here today, he had to be arrogant. Disregarding everything else, he had to first suppress the other party with his aura. Otherwise, with the cunning nature of these merchants, there was no way he could pry the truth out of their mouths. To be honest, after seeing the Southern Heavenly Gate's behavior, Yuzha, who was following behind him, was somewhat panicking. Not only did his chief master, Nan Tianyong, suffer from the terror of the Hong Chamber of Commerce's guest chamberlains, even he himself had personally experienced it. Although it was only for a short moment, it was enough to make him tremble in fear. Although the Southern Heavenly Gate was very strong, even stronger than Nan Tianyong, who was at the peak of the late stage of the Foundation establishment realm, Yuzha did not think that he would be able to gain any advantage over the Hong Chamber of Commerce's guest chamberlains. Even if he was not inferior to the other party in a one-on-one fight, it was not like the other party only had one guest chamberlain. Although he was on tenterhooks, Yuzha knew that he had no right to criticize the Southern Heavenly Gate. Furthermore, the Southern Heavenly Gate was not a simple person. If he did not have someone to rely on, he would not do something so stupid. After a while, the two of them were invited to a private room on the second floor by the manservant. This time, to Yu's surprise, the shopkeeper Hong Zhong, who was always polite to everyone, did not stand up to welcome them. "May I know what the two of you have come for?" Hong Zhong sat on a wooden armchair and drank a cup of high-quality tea while looking at the two of them. He said calmly, "The Hong Chamber of Commerce sincerely welcomes any guest. However, if you are here to cause trouble, then forgive me for not seeing you off. Don't ask for trouble." As a businessman, Hong Zhong had always welcomed guests from all over the world with a smile. However, he had never been kind to guests who had obviously come with ill intentions. As one of the top Chamber of Commerce on the 5 Great Islands, if the Hong Chamber of Commerce was too arrogant, people would say that they were bullying their customers. However, Hong Zhong knew that he had to be tough sometimes. He even had to make a show of his power every once in a while. Otherwise, if he only knew how to be patient, it would make people think that he was weak and easy to bully. They would then climb all over him and cause him endless trouble. It might even affect the impression other customers had of the Hong Chamber of Commerce, which would make business difficult. In Hong Zhong's eyes, since the two people in front of him had obviously come with ill intentions, there was no need for him to be polite. It was already very polite of him to send them off with tea. If the two of them were still so stubborn, he would have no choice but to kill the chicken to warn the monkey. As for trouble, the Southern Heavenly Gate glanced at Hong Zhong. A mere slave of a merchant dared to be so rude to him. He could not help but feel angry. He immediately laughed coldly and said, "The Hong Chamber of Commerce is quite famous. However, I'm very curious. Is this how you usually treat your guests?" Chapter 38:45. Of course, the reason why the executive of the Hong Chamber of Commerce gave him the spiritual jade card was mostly because of the big shot of the Nan clan. However, Southern Sky Gate rarely visited the Hong Chamber of Commerce on the North Island. Instead, he was roped in by another big merchant with a lot of money. After all, with his position in the soaring pavilion, as long as he was roped in, he could reap huge benefits. There are good and bad guests. If you're a good guest, the Hong Chamber of Commerce will naturally treat you with respect. If you're a bad guest, then there's nothing much to say. In the world of cultivation, the strong are respected. I'm sure you're aware of this, Hong Zhong said calmly. The strong are respected? Southern Sky Gate's eyes flickered. He was surprised to find out that he couldn't see through Hong Zhong's strength. He couldn't rule out the possibility that Hong Zhong was using some kind of secret skill to hide his strength. However, logically speaking, if he couldn't see through Hong Zhong's strength, it meant that Hong Zhong's strength was higher than his. No wonder he was the manager of the Hong Chamber of Commerce's North Island branch. He couldn't be underestimated. Southern Sky Gate's heart trembled, but he didn't plan to give up. After all, he came to the Hong Chamber of Commerce today with ample preparation. Oomph. It seems that in your eyes, I'm a bad guest. However, do you know who I am? Southern Sky Gate snorted and said disdainfully. Compared to the third brother, Nan Tianyong, Southern Sky Gate was not only stronger, but his position in the soaring pavilion was also much higher. Nan Tianyong's position as the supervising deacon would at most cause people to feel respectful toward him. However, his position in the South Heaven Gate was definitely a hot topic. Not only would people feel respectful toward him, he would also have access to a huge amount of cultivation resources. If anyone was able to befriend him, it would bring them great benefits. Almost half of the merchants in the inner street of the market took the initiative to befriend him. It could even be said that they were trying to curry favor with Southern Sky Gate. There were many people who wanted to rope him in with a lot of money. However, none of these merchants was the flagship business giant of the Hong Chamber of Commerce. Therefore, Southern Sky Gate had long harbored a grudge against the Hong Chamber of Commerce, or strictly speaking, the Hong Chamber of Commerce's North Island branch. Therefore, the South Heaven Gate had purposely paid a visit this time. On the surface, it seemed like it was for Nan Tianyong's sake, but in reality, it was possible that they were trying to use the opportunity to teach the South Heaven Gate a lesson. The Southern Heavenly Gate thought that Hong Zhong dared to be so rude to him because he didn't know his identity. Otherwise, Any merchant who knew his identity would treat him like the god of wealth. Why would they put on such a cold face? Unexpectedly, Hong Zhong didn't even raise his head as he said, ranked second among the 3 heroes of the Nan clan, Soaring Pavilion's eldest senior brother, Southern Heavenly Gate. How did you know? The South Heaven Gate's expression changed instantly. If the other party did not know his identity, it would be understandable for him to show such a cold face. But on the premise that he knew his identity as the first senior brother steward of the Soaring Sky Pavilion, he still dared to treat him like this. This was completely unexpected. Soaring Sky Pavilion's eldest senior brother, in charge of the new Blue Cloud Pavilion, didn't sound much different from Meng Jiawang, who was the eldest senior brother in charge of the new disciples of the Soaring Sky Pavilion. However, the difference in status between the two was like the difference between heaven and earth. As the eldest senior brother in charge of the Soaring Sky Pavilion, Meng Jiawang could only manage a dozen or so new disciples of the Blue Cloud Pavilion. Most of them hadn't even reached the foundation establishment stage. However, as the eldest senior brother in charge of the Soaring Sky Pavilion, apart from the Golden Core stage, Southern Heavenly Gate was in charge of all the inner disciples of the Soaring Sky Pavilion. He had a lot of power and was in charge of a lot of cultivation resources. It was enough to make countless people envious. The status and power of the two could not be compared at all. Even Hu Yunfeng, the pavilion master of the Welcoming Pavilion, a person with real power in charge of a department, did not dare to be careless in front of the Southern Heavenly Gate. Not to mention a mere Meng Jiawang. Of course, not all the department masters would pay any attention to the eldest senior brother in charge of the Soaring Sky Pavilion, Southern Heavenly Gate. The reason why Hu Yunfeng acted this way was because the Welcoming Pavilion was ranked last among all the departments. If it was the hall master of a top-notch department like the Law Enforcement Hall, a powerful person like Ram Jia would not even look at the Southern Heavenly Gate in the eye. Even so, in the eyes of the shopkeepers in the market, the eldest senior brother in charge of the Soaring Sky Pavilion, Southern Heavenly Gate, was still a hot commodity. He was a god of wealth worth spending a lot of money to win over. No matter which shop he walked into, he would be treated with the utmost respect. Even his own father would not be able to receive such treatment. As long as he bribed the Southern Heavenly Gate, he would take care of his shop's business when he purchased resources for the disciples of the Soaring Sky Pavilion in the future. The profit would be an astronomical figure, enough to make any businessman go crazy with envy. As the shopkeeper of the North Island branch of the Hong Chamber of Commerce, Hong Zhong had never paid any attention to the Southern Heavenly Gate. Now that he had taken the initiative to come to the Southern Heavenly Gate, he still dared to treat him so coldly despite knowing the Southern Heavenly Gate's identity. With such a huge gap, it was no wonder that the Southern Heavenly Gate lost his composure. The fact that Hong Zhong could become the shopkeeper of the branch meant that he was a businessman through and through. How could a businessman treat the god of wealth like this? Looking at the Southern Heavenly Gate's shocked expression, Hong Zhong said with a faint smile, "Although the Hong Chamber of Commerce is not an intelligence organization, it's basic to be observant when doing business on the North Island. No matter what, you are the eldest senior brother in charge of the Soaring Sky Pavilion. Is it strange that I recognized you?" Being recognized by a shopkeeper of the Hong Chamber of Commerce like Hong Zhong was supposed to be proof of one's identity. However, when the Southern Heavenly Gate heard this, his face instantly turned gloomy. "You know my identity, but you never paid any attention to me. Now that you've come to visit me, not only did you not offer me up, you even treated me so coldly. Isn't this a slap in the face?" The Southern Heavenly Gate thought that with his identity, he could at least intimidate the other party a little. However, he did not expect to be slapped in the face by the other party in such a calm manner. The Southern Heavenly Gate felt his face burning with embarrassment. The Southern Heavenly Gate forced his expression and sneered, "Humph, you know my identity, but you still dare to treat me so coldly." It seems that shopkeeper Hong is very confident in himself. I wonder if the higher-ups of the Middle Island of the Hong Chamber of Commerce will have any opinion on this. Although the Hong Chamber of Commerce was one of the few top chambers of commerce on the 5 Heavenly Islands, and Hong Zhong, as the shopkeeper of the branch, had enormous power on the North Island, If the higher-ups of the Middle Island knew that he had acted on impulse and harmed the Hong Chamber of Commerce's interests, his position as the branch shopkeeper would probably come to an end. Chapter 3846. In the eyes of any merchant, befriending Southern Sky Gate, a person with real power in the soaring pavilion, would bring them great benefits. Even Hong Zhong had the same idea in the beginning, but after secretly observing Southern Sky Gate's character, he immediately gave up on the idea. This article was written by. First, the reason was simple. Southern Sky Gate was a greedy person, and it could even be said that he was greedy beyond measure. Perhaps after befriending him, they could earn a huge profit of tens of thousands of spiritual jades through his power, but the price would be at least 60%, or even more. Although the merchant could still earn 40% of the profit, Hong Zhong, as a shopkeeper of the Hong Chamber of Commerce, had always looked at the person when choosing a partner, not the profit in front of him. Only by choosing the right partner could there be long-term benefits. Otherwise, even if they got a little profit in front of them temporarily, they would definitely have to pay it back tenfold, or even 100-fold in the future. This was Hong Zhong's experience after being in charge of the North Island branch of the Hong Chamber of Commerce for decades. Therefore, even though Hong Zhong knew that Southern Sky Gate was very popular and was highly sought after by other shopkeepers, Hong Zhong had never thought of befriending him. Instead, he kept a respectful distance and ignored him. Seeing that Hong Zhong was so fearless, the Southern Sky Gate was stunned. Logically speaking, a shopkeeper like Hong Zhong who was sent out was most afraid of the higher-ups of Middle Island, because those people controlled their future and could decide their future development with a single word. However, Hong Zhong in front of him seemed to be very confident and fearless. Or did this guy not believe that he could talk to the higher-ups of Middle Island? Southern Sky Gate quickly came to a conclusion. The reason why Hong Zhong was so fearless was most likely the latter. After all, in the eyes of normal people, although he, the Southern Sky Gate, was the eldest senior brother in charge of the Soaring Sky Pavilion, and was considered to have a high position in the eyes of most people, he was not qualified to talk to the higher-ups of Middle Island of the Hong Chamber of Commerce. Hong Zhong did not take his threats seriously. That was human nature. You don't believe that I have the ability? It doesn't matter. You'll be kneeling down and begging me later. The South Heaven Gate shook his head with a mocking expression and went straight to the point. I've come personally to ask about someone's background, shopkeeper Hong. I heard that you're quite close to the rogue cultivator, Lin Air, who killed my third brother. The Southern Heavenly Gate thought that after it said this, the other party would definitely retort fiercely, saying something stupid like protecting customer information was the lifeline of the Hong Chamber of Commerce. But unexpectedly, Hong Zhong's reaction was completely different from what he had expected. Hong Zhong didn't overreact or even say a word. He just picked up the teacup. That was all. The meaning of serving tea to send off the guest could not be more obvious. Regarding this question, Hong Zhong, who had always been amiable, did not even have the interest to say a word. He directly served tea to send the guest off. Even the South Heaven Gate's face flushed red with anger. He didn't even say a word. This kind of silent response was even more infuriating than malicious words of ridicule and ridicule. Shopkeeper Hong, I'll call you Shopkeeper Hong for the last time. I advise you to be sensible and cooperate with me. Otherwise, don't blame me for not giving you a chance if you don't want face. The South Heaven Gate forcefully suppressed his anger and said, although he had everything he could rely on for this trip, but if it wasn't necessary, he didn't want to completely fall out with Hong Zhong. After all, the Hong Chamber of Commerce was one of the few top chambers of commerce. If he could make the other party cooperate with him obediently, not only would he be able to obtain more benefits, it would also be more flawless. Therefore, the purpose of his trip today was to use Nan Tianyong's death as an opportunity to demonstrate his power to Hong Zhong. He didn't really want to cause trouble, nor did he want to completely fall out with the other party. I'm giving you face, but you don't want it? Hong Zhong glanced at him in surprise, and then said with a smile that was not a smile, this old man should be the one saying that. You are an uninvited guest, and this old man has already served tea to send you off, but you still have the cheek to stay here and refuse to leave. Who was the one who was being so shameless? After a pause, Hong Zhong said in a serious tone, "Since you are so thick-skinned, then I'll be frank. I can't help you with your request. Take care, I won't send you off. Old fart, I'm only showing you some respect because you're the manager of the Hong Merchant Group. But since you refuse a toast only to be forced to drink a forfeit, then don't blame me for being rude." As the South Heaven Gate spoke, his aura suddenly rose to its peak. As if a storm was approaching, the surrounding tables and chairs began to tremble. The foundation completion stage? His strength is stronger than Nan Tianyong's, but he dares to cause trouble here with such little strength. "Aren't you looking down on the Hong Chamber of Commerce?" Hong Zhong said with a serious expression. Without Hong Zhong's command, the moment the South Heaven Gate unleashed his aura, there were already 4 powerful auras that were not any weaker than his. Some of them were even stronger than his, and had already locked onto him from a distance. If the South Heaven Gate continued to act like this, there was no doubt that he would repeat the same mistake as Nan Tianyong. Even if he was stronger than Nan Tianyong, his ending would definitely not be any better. If he, the eldest senior brother in charge of the Soaring Sky Pavilion, were to be thrown out of the window like his younger brother, Nan Tianyong, then he would lose all his face. Even if he were to sit in this powerful position, it would be difficult for him to convince the others. He might even become a laughingstock. If a fight were to break out, the South Heaven Gate knew that he did not have the strength to defend against so many guest officials of the Hong Chamber of Commerce. Therefore, seeing that the situation was not good, he had no choice but to use the trump card that he had carefully prepared for the past 3 days. "Wait, if you want to fight against me, I advise you to read this letter first." The South Heaven Gate suddenly took out a letter from his pocket and threw it on the ground in front of him. Although the 4 guest officials did not show themselves, it was not difficult for them to read the contents of the letter with their strength. After the South Heaven Gate threw the letter, the 4 powerful auras dissipated at the same time, as if they had never appeared in the first place. As for Hong Zhong, after reading the contents of the letter, his expression turned gloomy for the first time. The letter was about Lin Air's identity. According to the letter, the South Heaven Gate was an important client recognized by the entire Hong Chamber of Commerce, while Lin Air was only a personal client of Hong Zhong. It was obvious which was more important. Chapter 38-47. If it was just a letter from an ordinary person in the headquarters, Hong Zhong would frown at most. He was a shopkeeper, and he had full authority to manage all the affairs of the Hong Chamber of Commerce in the North Island. Even the higher-ups of Middle Island couldn't tell him what to do. But the problem was that the person who signed the letter had the vital identity of the Hong Shadow Group's 4 Directions supervisor of the Hong Clan Chamber of Commerce. His authority was sufficient to supervise the various branches of the Hong Clan Chamber of Commerce, from the shopkeeper to the manservant. Once he was accused of malfeasance and investigated, then no matter how clean and honest Hong Zhong was, a layer of his skin would surely be peeled off, and he might even be stripped of his position as the branch's manager. His hard work of a few tens of years would be destroyed in a single day. Looking at Hong Zhong's gloomy face, Southern Sky Gate couldn't help but feel relieved. He even showed a long-lost complacency on his face. Since becoming the first senior brother in charge of the Soaring Pavilion, the South Heaven Gate had always maintained a poker face, especially not showing any superficial expression that would cause others to look down on him. However, at this moment, he could not help but feel proud of himself. From the moment he entered the room, he had been on the losing end. But now that he had revealed his trump card, the situation immediately turned around. Not only was Hong Zhong, the arrogant old man, shocked, even the 4 elusive foreign chamberlains were scared silent at this moment. Hong Ying's 4 Directions supervisor was a ruthless character that everyone in the Hong Chamber of Commerce feared. Not only was Hong Zhong, who was a normal branch manager, afraid of him, but even guest experts, who had a high degree of freedom, had to give way in front of him. The treatment of the Hong Chamber of Commerce's guardian foreign chamberlains was second to none in the industry. Even if the 4 Directions supervising inspector did not have the authority to supervise the guardian foreign chamberlains in name, if they were to be recorded by him and reported to the higher-ups, it would be hard to say if they could continue to be guardian foreign chamberlains in the future. The 4 guest experts who guarded the North Island branch were usually aloof and looked down on everyone in the North Island. Usually, they could be aloof and look down on anyone in the North Island. However, when it came to their personal interests, they had to keep silent. No matter what level of strength they were at, cultivators were always the most realistic group of people. How about it, old fart? Can you tell me the details of that bullshit linear now? I don't have the patience to waste my time with you. Under the astonishment of the surrounding crowd, the Southern Heavenly Gate sat down on an armchair in the middle of the room as if there was no one else around and leisurely crossed his legs. Everything was under his control. The Southern Heavenly Gate looked at the empty teapot at the side and snorted coldly at the servant at the door. Why aren't you serving me tea? You don't even have the slightest bit of eyesight. Why would the Hong Chamber of Commerce raise a bunch of trash like you? If it was before, the Southern Heavenly Gate would have been chased out by the 4 guest chamberlains. But now, no one dared to make a sound. Even Hong Zhong, the shopkeeper and the representative of the Hong's Chamber of Commerce in the North Island, just glanced at him. But he didn't say anything. The servant at the door shrunk his neck when he saw this. He had no choice but to sneak in and take the teapot away to prepare tea for the Southern Heavenly Gate. By the side, Yuzha could not help being secretly shocked when he saw this scene. The Hong's Chamber of Commerce was an unfathomable place. Now, with just a thin piece of paper, he managed to make the shopkeeper, Hong Zhong, and the 4 guest chamberlains speechless. Then, he turned the tables around and laughed. This Uncle Master of the Southern Heavenly Gate. As expected, he was a troublesome person that his cheap master could not compare to. However, at this moment, Yuzha could not help but feel secretly pleased when he saw Hong Zhong, the shopkeeper who did not even bother to hide his feelings, being defeated. Although the one who really stole the Star Ink Stone was Lin Er, Hong Zhong, who awarded the Star Ink Stone to Lin Er, was also on Yuzha's list of people to hate. However, because he was too weak, he could not find trouble with Hong Zhong even if he hated him. Now, Yuzha did not have to do it himself. The Uncle Master of the Southern Heavenly Gate had already done it for him. Looking at Hong Zhong, the so-called big shot of the Hong's Chamber of Commerce, being defeated, and the pitiful expression of him gritting his teeth in hatred but not daring to resist, this feeling was simply too great. There were pros and cons to everything. The identity of the shopkeeper of the North Island branch of the Hong's Chamber of Commerce brought Hong Zhong's status and power, but also placed layers of restrictions on him. With this letter in front of him, if Hong Zhong said no, it would be equivalent to going against Hong Ying's 4 Directions supervising inspector. Although the supervising inspector of the 4 Directions didn't have the power to promote others, if they wanted to ruin someone's future, they could do it with just a word. Therefore, even a powerful shopkeeper like Hong Zhong didn't dare to underestimate them in the slightest. After all, this matter was related to one's future, so who would dare to take it lightly? After a while, the servant brought the tea to the door and carefully looked at the gloomy Hong Zhong. Seeing that Hong Zhong did not say anything, he could only bite the bullet and place the tea on the table beside the Southern Heavenly Gate. Then he bowed and left. The Southern Heavenly Gate poured himself a cup and took a sip in satisfaction. He then smirked at Hong Zhong and said, "You should have thought about what you should do. When you're under someone else's roof, you have no choice but to lower your head. You're already an old man. I don't think you need me to teach you that." The South Heaven Gate never doubted if Hong Zhong would cooperate with them. With the letter from the 4 supervising envoys of the Hong Ying group, it was equivalent to holding an imperial sword. The South Heaven Gate was not worried that Hong Zhong would not cooperate. Hong Zhong was a sensible man. If he did not have the tolerance to adapt to the situation, he would not have been able to become the shopkeeper of the North Island branch. Previously, according to the Southern Heavenly Gate's original plan, unless it was absolutely necessary, he did not plan to use this letter to force Hong Zhong to submit. He originally thought that after Hong Zhong realized his power, he would take the initiative to cooperate with him in a big business deal. Although using someone's power to establish his authority would allow the other party to have a better understanding of his power, making it easier for him to gain a stronger position in the future. If he used his power to bully others too much, it might have the opposite effect. If Hong Zhong held a grudge and refused to cooperate with him, it would be as bad as going too far. However, Hong Zhong, this old man, did not take the face he was given and insisted on stepping on his face. There was nothing he could do to stop him, so he had no choice but to satisfy him. The Southern Heavenly Gate was not as impatient as he claimed to be. He did not seem to have any intention of rushing Hong Zhong. Judging from his expression, he seemed to be enjoying the feeling. Chapter 38-48. Seeing the South Heaven Gate's fearless expression after taking out the letter, Hong Zhong fell silent for a moment before he burst out laughing. "It seems like you're certain that I'm going to be the one in the bag." "Oh, isn't that so? Do you still dare to say no to me?" Southern Heavenly Gate sneered, not taking Hong Zhong's question seriously at all. Hong Ying Group's Four Directions inspectors were very important in the Hong Chamber of Commerce. He knew it clearly when he was in contact with the higher-ups of Middle Island. He easily defeated a branch manager, and not only was the other party unable to resist, he even had to kneel down and beg for mercy in order to save his life. With this letter guarding this place, even if Hong Zhong was given a few more guts, he would not dare to say half a word of no. Half a word? Hong Zhong raised an eyebrow and shook his head. "Then I'll have to disappoint you. I've never said more than half a word. However, I can tell you very clearly that you can leave now." In an instant, the atmosphere in the Hong Chamber of Commerce suddenly froze. Southern Heavenly Gate, who was confident that everything was under his control, had a subtle and even unbelievable expression on his face. "You don't understand what I said?" Hong Zhong looked at Southern Heavenly Gate's expression, his eyes filled with mockery and coldness. "Then, I might as well make it more straightforward and easier to understand. You can leave." "Huh? You old man, are you suffering from dementia?" Southern Heavenly Gate's face instantly turned red, and he couldn't help but say angrily, "Did you read what was written in the letter? How dare you ignore the words of the Four Directions inspectors of the Hong Ying Group and pretend not to see them?" Southern Heavenly Gate thought that after he deliberately mentioned the words that carried great weight in the Hong Chamber of Commerce, even if the other party wasn't as afraid as he imagined, he wouldn't be able to ignore them. However, after hearing his words, Hong Zhong still looked at him as if he was looking at an idiot. He said calmly, "Of course I saw what he said, but so what? As the manager of the North Island branch, I have full authority to decide everything in the North Island of the Hong Chamber of Commerce. Do you think that a mere Four Directions inspector can control me? Fuck." The Southern Sky Gate stared in bewilderment. Even though he was usually experienced and prudent, he couldn't help but curse at that moment. Even the other people in the Hong Chamber of Commerce, as well as the four elusive guest chamberlains, were shocked. One could clearly feel that their aura paused for a moment. They were obviously stunned. There was no problem with Hong Zhong's logic at all. The so-called four supervisors of the Hong Ying Group only had the power to supervise the Four Directions branch and had no direct leadership power. Therefore, in theory, if Hong Zhong, the manager of the North Island branch, wanted to do something, the four supervisors really couldn't do anything. However, even if the other party couldn't control him, he was still in existence that could stifle his future. Hong Zhong wouldn't be able to bear the consequences. Even a manservant at the bottom of the Hong Chamber of Commerce could see the stakes clearly. Hong Zhong, the veteran shopkeeper who had been guarding the North Island branch for decades, was not a match for Hong Zhong. How could he not see it? However, he still did so. This was really incomprehensible. Could it be that shopkeeper Hong didn't even have this little bit of slyness? Just because of Lin Air, he let his emotions affect his decisions to the point of going against a Four Directions supervisor? Isn't this a little too illogical? "Sir, you're still lingering here. Looks like you're going to take the hard way instead of the soft way." Hong Zhong's expression remained the same. He picked up his teacup again and smiled. "For guests, can you please send these two evil guests off for me?" After hearing that, the Southern Sky Gate and Yuge's expressions instantly changed. After coming back to their senses, the Southern Sky Gate hurriedly threatened, "This old man has gone crazy. I like to see who else will go crazy with him. From the Southern Sky Gate's point of view, even if Hong Zhong had gone crazy and ignored the Four Directions supervisor's threat, the other people, including the four guest chamberlains, wouldn't go crazy with him. Don't forget, when it came to personal interests, cultivators were always the most realistic group of people. Unexpectedly, after a brief pause, the four powerful auras once again loomed over his head without hesitation. It was obvious that between Hong Zhong and the Southern Sky Gate, the four guest chamberlains had already made their choice. The four guest chamberlains appeared at the same time, not giving the Southern Sky Gate any chance to resist. They immediately surrounded him and used the same method they used against Nantian Yong last time, tossing them out of the window on the second floor. As it wasn't the opening day of the inner street, there weren't many people on the street. However, when two living people were suddenly tossed out of the window, and one of them was an important figure like the Southern Sky Gate, the inner street instantly burst into an uproar. Being pointed at by the crowd with mocking gazes, not only was the authority of the South Heaven Gate embarrassed, even a nobody like Yuzha felt ashamed and was too ashamed to face the others. This time, the two of them finally experienced what Nantian Yong had felt. The only difference was that Nantian Yong was alone, while the two of them had teamed up to embarrass themselves. Damned old man. The Southern Sky Gate looked at the calm Hong Zhong at the window on the second floor, and couldn't help but grit his teeth in hatred, his face burning. When he first found out that his third brother, Nantian Yong, had been thrown out of the Hong Merchant Guild, he had been full of disdain and disdain. He didn't expect that when he was the one being thrown out, and had made ample preparations beforehand, he still couldn't escape from the same embarrassing situation. How could he endure this? As the eldest senior brother who was in charge of the Soaring Sky Pavilion, he was thrown out of the street from the second floor without being able to resist, and was ridiculed by so many passers-by. Today, the Southern Sky Gate had completely embarrassed him for the rest of his life. As for Yu Zhe, a nobody like him, he couldn't help but curse in his heart. This senior uncle of his was so amazing. He had pressured Hong Zhong and the others to the point where they couldn't even breathe, but he still ended up in such an embarrassing situation. Not only did he fail to find out more about Lin Air's background, but he had also embarrassed himself. This was really a case of going for wool and coming home shorn. The three heroes of the Nan family were so famous, but in the end, when they went up against a giant like the Hong Merchant Guild, it was their third brother and second brother who were thrown out of the street to be humiliated and ridiculed. Yuzha finally understood that they were never on the same level. Chapter 38-49. Both of them were smart people. No matter how much they couldn't swallow their anger today, they could only grit their teeth and swallow it. Otherwise, with their strength, if they really fought with so many experts from the Hong Chamber of Commerce, the outcome wouldn't be as simple as losing face. Just as Southern Heavenly Gate and Yuzha were planning to escape, a piece of paper floated in front of them. It was the letter that Southern Heavenly Gate had previously shown to intimidate Hong Zhong. The letter was signed by Hong Ing Group's Four Directions supervising envoy. You want to threaten this old man with just a piece of lousy paper? Do the two of you think my Hong Chamber of Commerce is too simple and dirty? You should take this kind of trash back and read it slowly. Hong Zhong stood by the window on the second floor and smiled faintly. Take care, I won't see you out. The crowd of passers-by cheered loudly. Hong Zhong had been operating in the inner street of the market for several decades, and he had always been kind to everyone. He had a good reputation, and his relationships with people were extraordinary. It was not something that a so-called important figure like the Southern Heavenly Gate could compare to. You got guts. Old man, remember this. I'll settle this score with you sooner or later. I want to see how long you can be a shopkeeper of a branch. Southern Sky Gate gritted his teeth and cursed. Then, amidst the laughter of the crowd, he and Yuzha covered their faces and fled in a sorry state. Looking at the backs of the two fleeing figures, Hong Zhong smiled faintly and muttered to himself, How long can I be a shopkeeper? Of course, I can be a shopkeeper for as long as I want. Old Hong, you've lost so much face this time. That guy definitely won't let this go. You have to be prepared. One of the guest experts reminded him. If everything went according to plan, the South Heaven Gate would surely contact the supervising envoys of the four directions after they returned. Hong Zhong's actions would surely incur their displeasure, which would bring him some trouble. Hong Zhong shook his head indifferently. It doesn't matter. There's no need to worry too much about a clown. If they want to scare me with a mere letter, the Nan family's 3 heroes are too naive. Hong In Group, supervising inspector? Hee. When the guest experts heard this, they looked at each other and laughed. Their faces were full of mockery. There was nothing wrong with the Southern Sky Gate's logic in using Hong Ying's 4 directions supervising envoys to threaten a branch manager. Normally speaking, no branch manager of the Hong Chamber of Commerce would dare to ignore such a threat. If it was anyone else, the Southern Heavenly Gate would have completed their mission perfectly. However, the Southern Sky Gate had made a fatal mistake. Hong Zhong's position in the Hong Merchant Association was never as simple as a shopkeeper of a branch. He had another, more important identity. His surname was Hong. If Hong Zhong did not mention this identity, the 4 foreign chamberlains would have almost forgotten about it. Now that he thought about it, he understood what Hong Zhong had done just now. However, just because they can't touch me doesn't mean they'll give up. I'm a little worried about that little brother Lin Air now. There was a hint of worry between Hong Zhong's brows. After the previous few encounters, he had already seen the incredible potential in Lin Yi. This potential was something that he had never seen before. As a businessman, Hong Zhong's intuition told him that this Lin Yi was the rare commodity he had been waiting for. If he missed this opportunity, he might not have another one like this in his life. Hong Zhong was very clear that no matter how the Southern Sky Gate tried to provoke the 4 directions supervising envoys, they would never be able to threaten him. However, Lin Yi was different. But that Lin Air was different. Even if he could defeat Yu Zhe, and even if he could use that unknown but shocking killing move to instantly kill Nin Tianyong, a peak late-stage Zhuji expert, in the end, his potential was far from being developed. His strength was still very weak. If the South Heaven Gate took the opportunity to blow the matter up, forcing the authorities of the Soaring Sky Pavilion to pressure the enforcement hall to dig Lin Air out, it would be hard to tell what would happen to him. After all, with his current strength, there was no way he could withstand the storm. In this situation, even if Hong Zhong wanted to help Lin Yi, there was nothing he could do. Just like the Southern Sky Gate and Yu Zhe, he knew nothing about Lin Yi's background. On the other hand, after suffering such a huge loss at the Hong Merchant Guild, the Southern Sky Gate would not let it go so easily. The first thing he did when he returned to the Soaring Pavilion was to write a letter to the 4 directions supervising inspector of the Hong In Group in the Middle Island. There is no need to exaggerate. As long as he truthfully described what happened at the Hong Merchant Guild today, he would not need to intervene. The more powerful a person was, the more they value their reputation. If Hong Zhong did not take his letter seriously, it was the same as not taking him seriously. Even if the Southern Sky Gate did not try to sow discord, the 4 directions supervising inspector of the Middle Island would definitely attack Hong Zhong for the sake of his reputation. The second thing was to make a big deal out of the death of the 3rd brother, Nan Tianyong. Since Hong Zhong was unwilling to cooperate, then if he wanted to force Lin Air, the individual cultivator of unknown origin, out, he had to borrow the power of the law enforcement hall. However, the enforcement hall was one of the top departments among the 3 great pavilions of the North Island. Its power was not to be underestimated, not to mention the Southern Sky Gate's eldest senior brother in charge of the Soaring Pavilion. Even the elders with weaker power would not be able to influence it. In the entire Soaring Pavilion, the number of people that could force the hall master of the enforcement hall, Ramjia, to lower his head could be counted on one hand. The person that the Southern Sky Gate was looking for this time was the most powerful one among them, the master of the Soaring Pavilion, Shanghai Tianhua. The Southern Sky Gate had carefully considered the reason why he was looking for Shanghai Tianhua. Shanghai Tianhua was the undisputed leader of the Soaring Pavilion. Now that his 3rd brother, the supervising deacon of the Soaring Pavilion, had been killed, it was normal for him the second brother, to seek justice from the first senior brother. No one else would be able to find fault with him. Shanghai Tianhua, the first senior brother in charge of the Soaring Pavilion, was definitely a super expert that stood at the top of the pyramid of the North Island. Even though the Southern Sky Gate was the eldest senior brother in charge of the Soaring Pavilion, it was not easy for him to meet with him. Fortunately, the Southern Sky Gate was not the eldest senior brother in charge of the Soaring Pavilion for nothing. Due to his position, he would often interact with the higher-ups. Although he did not speak much with them, as time went by, he was able to figure out the whereabouts of these people. Chapter 3850. Hualan Residence was located in the core area of the Soaring Sky Pavilion. It was not a cave that was specifically used for cultivation, but a man-made loft. It was where Shanghai Tianhua lived his daily life. It was named Hualan Residence because there were only 2 people living here. Both of them had taken a word from their names to form the name of the residence. The word Hua was taken from Shanghai Tianhua, while the word Lan was taken from the eldest young mistress, Shangwan Laner. Although the security was extremely tight, the Southern Heavenly Gate managed to enter the Hualan residence in the end by relying on his identity as the eldest senior brother in charge of the Soaring Sky Pavilion. At this moment, Shanghai Tianhua was personally teaching Shangwan Laner how to cultivate. To be able to receive personal tutelage from a top-tier powerhouse like Shangwan Tianhua, in the eyes of any cultivator, that was a blessing that could not be obtained in several lifetimes. Alas, comparisons were odious. This sort of treatment that others could only dream of, but in the eyes of the Shangwan First Miss, it was not attractive at all. Just like now, when the Southern Heavenly Gate was led into the residence by the guards, eldest young Mistress Shangwan was fooling around with the little curly bear. As for Shanghai Tianhua, the dignified Lord Pavilion Master, he was currently sitting at the side with his arms crossed and a bitter smile on his face. He looked like he was having a headache. Due to the distance between them and the fact that his children were not by his side, Shangwan Laner, his only granddaughter, was definitely the apple of Shanghai Tianhua's eye. Even if he did not spoil her, he still doted on her. Under normal circumstances, unless something serious happened, Shanghai Tianhua would stay in the Hualan residence after dark. Not only did he enjoy the company of his family, it was also convenient for him to supervise Shangwan Laner's cultivation. However, there was one thing that gave the Lord Pavilion Master a headache. Although Shangwan Laner had great talent, she had never been interested in cultivation. Even with him, her grandfather, watching over her, it was useless. She was still half-hearted and distracted. Otherwise, if eldest young Mistress Shangwan really wanted to improve with her great talent, coupled with Shanghai Tianhua's personal guidance, he had probably already become an outstanding figure of the Soaring Sky Pavilion's new generation. Seeing the Southern Heavenly Gate enter, Shangwan Laner immediately said excitedly, "Grandpa, someone is looking for you. Let's call it a day." Shanghai Tianhua didn't know whether to laugh or cry. "Stop here? Little Laner, you haven't even officially started cultivating today, right? How could you say such a thing?" Shangwan Laner stuck out her tongue cutely, and the little curly bear next to her also made a face. Shanghai Tianhua had no choice but to give up. The Southern Heavenly Gate was the eldest senior brother in charge of the Soaring Sky Pavilion. Shanghai Tianhua could not ignore it. It could not be helped that Shangwan Laner took the opportunity to skip this lesson. Seeing that Shanghai Tianhua had noticed him, the Southern Heavenly Gate hurriedly knelt on the ground and said respectfully, "Disciple Southern Heavenly Gate pays respect to the Pavilion Master." In front of Shanghai Laner, his only granddaughter, Shanghai Tianhua, was just an amiable old man. However, in front of outsiders, he was the top figure standing at the peak of the entire North Island, an out-and-out super powerful big shot. Even if he deliberately restrained his aura, he still made people feel that he was powerful and domineering, making them tremble as if they were walking on thin ice. Shanghai Tianhua waved his hand, signaling the Southern Heavenly Gate to stand up and speak. He said, "What do you want?" It was just a casual question, but because Shanghai Tianhua had regained his majesty, the Southern Heavenly Gate an expert in the peak foundation establishment realm, was frightened from the bottom of his heart. He felt that if he relaxed even a little, he would immediately be drowned in the other party's inadvertent pressure. He held back every bit of aura in his body and stood up from the ground quietly. The Southern Heavenly Gate then answered carefully, "Pavilion Master, I'm here for my third brother." Nan Tianyong? Shanghai Tianhua slightly raised his eyebrows. Although Nan Tianyong was an unimportant person in his eyes, and he would not normally pay attention to him, as the Pavilion Master of the Soaring Sky Pavilion, even the slightest movement in the Soaring Sky Pavilion would not escape his eyes. As the supervising deacon of the Soaring Sky Pavilion, Nan Tianyong was killed in the territory of the three pavilions. Even if no one deliberately added fuel to the fire, it had caused quite a stir in the past few days. It was impossible for Shanghai Tianhua not to know about it. Pavilion Master is wise. My third brother, as the supervising deacon of the Soaring Sky Pavilion, was killed by an outsider rogue cultivator in the market. If we don't catch the culprit as soon as possible, I'm afraid it will negatively affect the reputation of the Soaring Sky Pavilion. The Southern Heavenly Gate said cautiously. Even someone as shrewd as him did not dare to play any tricks in front of a top-tier powerhouse like Shangwan Tianhua. All he could do was carefully choose his words to express his intentions. Any other actions would be unnecessary, and he would be trying to act smart and courting death. Shanghai Tianhua nodded his head slightly. There was nothing wrong with the Southern Heavenly Gate's words. If the matter continued to be delayed, although it would not cause any trouble, it would still damage the reputation of the Soaring Sky Pavilion. That's right, but didn't the disciplinary hall take care of it? Nan Tianyong is the supervising deacon, which means he's one of the disciplinary hall's people. They won't just ignore it. Shanghai Tianhua said calmly. It was true that Nan Tianyong was the supervising deacon of the Soaring Sky Pavilion, but at the end of the day, he was still a member of the disciplinary hall. The Southern Heavenly Gate's heart sank when he heard this. Nan Tianyong was indeed one of the disciplinary hall's people. Normally, the disciplinary hall would attach great importance to the death of one of their own. However, the truth was that although Nan Tianyong's death had been filed, the entire disciplinary hall was just going through the motions. They did not make any big moves. Otherwise, with the terrifying power of the disciplinary hall, they would have dug out the rogue cultivator Lin heir in the past few days. How could there be no movement like now? In the end, whether the disciplinary hall would take Nan Tianyong's death seriously depended on Ram Jie's attitude. If Ram Jie gave the order, then even if they had to dig 3 feet into the North Island, the disciplinary hall would still have a way to dig out Lin heir. However, the problem now was that Nan Tianyong's death was not even worth Ram Jie's attention. To make a big fuss over such an insignificant person, in Ram Jie's eyes, was an extremely ridiculous and stupid thing to do. Since his superior already had such an attitude, it was understandable and normal for his subordinates to feign civility and go through the motions. Ram Jie could ignore it, but as the master of the Soaring Sky Pavilion, Shanghai Tianhua could not completely disregard the reputation of the Soaring Sky Pavilion. Chapter 38:51. From Shanghai Tianhua's words, the Southern Heaven Gate could tell what the Pavilion Master was trying to say. It seemed like he did not want to interfere with the disciplinary hall. As a matter of fact, just as the Southern Heaven Gate had thought, Shanghai Tianhua did not want to pressure the disciplinary hall, or strictly speaking, Ram Jie, just because of Nan Tianyong's death. Ram Jie was a trusted general that Shanghai Tianhua had personally raised. He had always been highly regarded by the Southern Heaven Gate. Although there had been some criticism in the past, Ram Jie's ability and achievements were obvious to all. Everyone had their own way of doing things. Since Shanghai Tianhua thought highly of Ram Jie, he would not interfere with Ram Jie's business. Otherwise, if he were to interfere too much, not only would it bring no benefits, it would also cause a rift in their relationship. With the wisdom of Shanghai Tianhua, he would not make such a low-level mistake. Furthermore, although Nan Tianyong's death was a big deal in Shanghai Tianhua's eyes, it was still a small matter. His personal intelligence had already reported to him that Nan Tianyong had tried to kill Lin Er in front of the crowd, only to be killed in the end. Based on Shanghuan Tianhua's usual way of doing things, even though he was the pavilion master of the Soaring Sky Pavilion, he wouldn't blindly protect his own people. It was normal for cultivators to kill each other, as long as they weren't killed by underhanded means. Even if it was a core disciple of the Soaring Sky Pavilion who died, Shanghuan Tianhua wouldn't make a big fuss about it. Deaths were bound to happen in the Jianghu. Since he was not as strong as the pavilion master, there was nothing more to say. He deserved to die. However, it was impossible for Shanghai Tianhua to tell his disciples about this. He could only express his stance by treating it coldly. The Southern Heaven Gate initially thought they had a chance to convince the pavilion master to help them. With just a few words, they would be able to pressure the disciplinary hall, and Lin Er would have nowhere to hide. However, they did not expect Shanghai Tianhua to treat it so coldly. In front of the top boss of Shanghuan Tianhua. After all, the Southern Sky Gate was only an insignificant figure. Since the big shot had already expressed his stance, no matter how dissatisfied the small figure was, he wouldn't dare to continue dwelling on this issue. Otherwise, if he angered the big shot, it would be hard to say what would happen to him. Pavilion Master, this disciple also knows that the law enforcement hall has its own rules and does not allow external forces to interfere. This disciple has no complaints about this, but this disciple and Nantianyong are brothers from the same mother. Now that my brother has been killed, I can't just sit back and do nothing. Even if it's just me, I must avenge him. The South Heaven Gate's eyes were filled with tears as he spoke in a righteous tone. The passionate and righteous expression was obviously an act. However, the South Heaven Gate was not afraid of being seen through by Shanghai Tianhua. Even if it was a fake act, the content of the words was the truth. Whether it was for the reputation of the three heroes of the Nan clan. In order to give their eldest brother, Nan Tianba, a satisfactory explanation, with the Southern Heaven Gate's current situation, they had to find Lin Er and avenge their third brother, Nan Tianyong. You're quite ambitious. It's a good thing. It's a good thing. Shanghuan Tianhua nodded calmly, but didn't say anything else. Based on Shanghuan Tianhua's temperament, no matter how noble or lowly he would always praise hot-blooded and loyal men. However, he had behaved in such a cold manner. It was obvious that he had seen through the South Heaven Gate's plan. The South Heaven Gate's face blushed in embarrassment. Luckily, he was quite shrewd. He managed to remain calm and continued. Pavilion Master, I, an inner disciple of the Soaring Sky Pavilion, Yuja, witnessed with my own eyes that the person who killed my third brother, Nan Tianyong, was a rogue cultivator who called himself Lin Er. The only person who knows the identity of this rogue cultivator is the manager of the Hong Merchant Guild, Hong Zhong. Lin Er? Shanghai Laner, who was playing with the little curly bear, pricked up her ears when she heard the familiar word. Although Lin E had never told her that he was Lin Er, and Shanghai Laner had always been naive, her intelligence was not low. She could easily guess the relationship between Lin E and Lin E based on what Lin E had asked her to do. Even if she was a bit confused about why Yuja couldn't recognize Lin E in front of him, she could still guess what was going on. She just didn't point it out. Lin Er killed Nan Tianyong? After hearing the South Heaven Gate's words, Shanghai Laner was stunned. Due to the fact that she had been supervised by Shanghai Tianhua for the past few days, the rumors that were spreading in the outside world did not reach her ears. She was stunned when she heard the news. Shanghai Laner was not strong herself, but she had been influenced since she was young. She knew the strength of a supervising deacon of the Soaring Sky Pavilion like the back of her hand. He was at least at the peak of the late-stage Foundation establishment realm. Her junior brother was able to kill him. Shanghai Laner was instantly curious. She did not care about Nan Tianyong's life or death. In comparison, she was closer to her junior brother, Lin E. Therefore, it went without saying that she would side with Lin E. Previously, Nan Tianyong and Yu Zhe had been looking for the so-called Lin Er. Since this pair of master and disciple had been plotting against her junior brother, Lin E, they were definitely not good people. Nan Tianyong must have pushed them too far, so her junior brother had no choice but to kill them. That must be it. Shang Wanlan wasn't interested in the conversation between her grandfather and the Southern Sky Gate, but now she was interested. She just wanted to gather some information for her junior brother Lin Yi, so that she could prepare for anything in advance, so that Lin Yi wouldn't be flustered when the time came. Hong Zhong. Shanghai Tianhua hesitated for a moment, then looked at the South Heaven Gate and said, "You went to find him?" Seeing that Shanghai Tianhua seemed to be interested, the South Heaven Gate became excited and said, "Pavilion Master is wise. According to what I know, this shopkeeper Hong not only has a close relationship with Lin Air, but he also added fuel to the fire during the conflict between Lin Air and my third brother, Nan Tianyong. His intentions are extremely sinister. Today, this disciple went to find shopkeeper Hong to inquire about Lin Air's identity. But unexpectedly, not only did this shopkeeper Hong refuse to cooperate with me, but he also rudely ordered several honored guests to kick this disciple out. This is simply not putting our soaring sky pavilion in his eyes. This is intolerable. Please uphold justice for this disciple." At the end of his speech, the Southern Heavenly Gate was filled with righteous indignation. This time, he wasn't faking it. When he recalled the scene of him being thrown down from the second floor, the Southern Heavenly Gate's face couldn't help but burn with embarrassment. Chapter 3852. Since Shanghai Tianhua had no intention of pressuring the law enforcement hall, if Southern Sky Gate wanted to find Lin Air, they had to turn their attention to Hong Zhong again. If they could persuade Shanghai Tianhua to put pressure on Hong Zhong, not only could they get the information about Lin Air's identity, but they could also help them vent their anger, killing two birds with one stone. Today's situation at the Hong Merchant Guild was completely out of his expectations. The old man Hong Zhong did not even place the personal letter of Hong Ying's 4 directions supervising inspector in his eyes. However, in the eyes of the Southern Heavenly Gate, no matter how stubborn Hong Zhong was, as long as Shangwan Tianhua was willing to speak up, Hong Zhong would have no choice but to kneel and lick his boots obediently. Even a strong dragon couldn't suppress a snake in its old haunts, not to mention in front of Shanghai Tianhua, the top boss of the North Island. Even if Hong Zhong was a shopkeeper of the Hong Chamber of Commerce, he was far from the title of a strong dragon. He couldn't even be considered snake. He was at most a worm. You said that Hong Zhong was adding fuel to the fire behind the scenes? Do you have any solid evidence? Shanghai Tianhua asked with a slight frown. Speaking of which, between him and Hong Zhong, one was the top tycoon in the North Island, and the other was the spokesperson of the Hong's Chamber of Commerce in the North Island. Not only did they have a lot of official cooperation, but they also had a good personal relationship. However, in Shanghai Tianhua's understanding, Hong Zhong had always been kind to people, and he had a good reputation. How could he be adding fuel to the fire in this kind of thing? Pavilion Master, before my third brother had the accident, he was thrown down from the second floor of the Hong Chamber of Commerce by Hong Zhong because of Lin Air. On the day when my third brother fought with Lin Air, he deliberately let Lin Air hide in the Hong Chamber of Commerce for 2 hours. After coming out of the Hong Chamber of Commerce, he was only at the peak of the early stage of the Foundation Establishment realm, but he was able to kill my third brother, who was at the peak of the late stage of the Foundation Establishment realm, with one move after coming out of the Hong Chamber of Commerce. If the Hong Chamber of Commerce didn't do something, who would believe it? There are many witnesses. I dare not make any false report. Please investigate. Southern Sky Gate knelt down again and cowed out. Lin Yi instantly killing Nan Tianyong had nothing to do with Hong Zhong. However, from the other people's point of view, it was only natural for Hong Zhong to be blamed for this. Otherwise, who would believe that a mere cultivator at the peak of the early stage of the Foundation Establishment realm was able to kill a cultivator at the peak of the late stage with a single move? Perhaps only the Hong Chamber of Commerce, which had gathered countless treasures, could achieve this. Perhaps they had some kind of consumable treasure that could instantly kill a peak late Foundation Establishment expert. Furthermore, before that, Lin Yi had indeed intentionally stayed in the Hong Chamber of Commerce for 2 whole hours. Such a long period of time was more than enough for him to do anything. It was hard not to be suspicious. Shanghuan Tianhua took a deep look at Southern Heavenly Gate, who was kneeling on the ground. His expression turned serious. The South Heaven Gate would not dare to hide the truth from him. In that case, the death of Nan Tianyong was definitely related to the Hong Merchant Guild, especially Hong Zhong. After pondering for a moment, Shanghai Tianhua finally said, "All right, I will ask Hong Zhong about this matter." Although he had a good personal relationship with Hong Zhong. However, Shanghai Tianhua had always been clear about public and private affairs. Since Hong Zhong was indeed suspected of adding fuel to the fire, as the pavilion master of Soaring Sky Pavilion, he had to intervene. Hearing this, Southern Heavenly Gate was delighted. He was delighted. As long as Shanghuan Tianhua was willing to step forward and ask about this matter, then his objective today would be achieved. As long as Shanghai Tianhua intervened, Hong Zhong would not dare to hide anything from Lin Air's identity, unless he didn't want to stay in the North Island anymore. Just as Southern Heavenly Gate was secretly delighted, Shanghai Laner suddenly said, "Grandpa, it's inappropriate for you to do this." "Inappropriate, my ass." The pavilion master of Soaring Sky Pavilion intervened on behalf of his disciple. This was a matter of course. "Inappropriate, my ass." Southern Heavenly Gate almost wanted to curse, but when he saw that it was Shanghai Laner who spoke, he had to hold back the curse. Not only could he not show any dissatisfaction, but he had to smile awkwardly. "Oh, what's wrong with it? Little Lana, tell me about it." Shanghuan Tianhua asked with great interest. In front of his granddaughter, he was completely an ordinary kind elder. Moreover, although Shanghai Laner did not like to cultivate, she was smart since she was a child. She often had clear and unique views on many things, unlike people in high positions like him, who were sometimes blinded by some interests. Shanghai Laner said seriously, "Grandpa, you once taught me that a gentleman can't complain and cultivate himself." Nan Tianyong couldn't defeat Lin Air and lost his life, but he insisted on blaming Grandpa Hong, who was obviously an outsider. He even asked Grandpa Hong to stand up for him. Isn't this ridiculous? If this precedent is set, then in the future, if any Soaring Sky Pavilion disciple loses outside, won't you have to stand up for him, grandfather? Ugh, mistress, Hong Zhong can't be considered an outsider. He's the one who's adding fuel to the fire. South Heaven Gate immediately tried to defend himself. Adding fuel to the fire? Do you have any proof? Shanghai Laner rolled her eyes at him and said, "For what you said just now, from the beginning to the end, you can't prove that Grandpa Hong is really involved, right? Or can you guarantee with your life that the killer move that Lin Air used to kill Nan Tianyong was given to him by Grandpa Hong for free?" This, Southern Heavenly Gate was speechless. How could he have proof for this? He was just using the logical thinking of ordinary people to pour dirty water on Hong Zhong. If he really wanted to guarantee with his life, he did not have the guts and courage to do so. Moreover, even if he could prove that Lin Air's killer move was given by Hong Zhong, how could he prove that Hong Zhong gave it to him for free? In the end, it was all Hong Zhong's words. It was an unsolvable problem. Left with no choice, the South Heaven Gate turned to Shanghuan Tianhua. There was no way he could refute Shanghuan Lan Er's words. Even if he could, he would not dare to do so, as what if Shanghuan Lan bore a grudge against him? If this miss would say a few bad things about him in front of her grandfather, then the future of Southern Heavenly Gate would be bleak. So what if he was the eldest senior brother of the Soaring Sky Pavilion? Shanghai Tianhua could easily make him fall to the ground with a single thought. Fortunately, the Southern Heavenly Gate was relieved that this was only Miss Shanghuan's own words. As the pavilion master of the Soaring Sky Pavilion, Shanghai Tianhua would always consider his own interests first. He would not be as naive as this Mississippi. However, Shanghai Tianhua's next words made the Southern Heavenly Gate's jaw drop. Chapter 3853. But Southern Heavenly Gate still wanted to say something, but Shanghai Tianhua waved his hand and interrupted him. After all, My identity is still too sensitive. If someone with ulterior motives thinks that the three pavilions are dissatisfied with the Hong Chamber of Commerce, the impact will be huge. This was not an excuse. For someone like Shanghai Tianhua, anything he did would be interpreted by people with ulterior motives. If he listened to Southern Heavenly Gate's words and asked Hong Zhong about it, it would be easily misinterpreted as him being dissatisfied with the Hong Chamber of Commerce. Therefore, as Shanghai Laner had said, unless Southern Heavenly Gate could produce conclusive evidence, Shanghai Tianhua would not easily step forward. Grandpa, I'm right again. The three pavilions are not allowed to interfere with the business of the Chamber of Commerce. You can't take the lead in breaking the rules. Furthermore, Grandpa Hong treats your granddaughter so well. Xiao Ba was even given to me by him. How can I make things difficult for Grandpa Hong just because of someone's side of the story? Shanghai Laner said proudly. Yes. Little Lon, is the one who sees things clearly. Shanghai Tianhua chuckled, looking at the grandfather and granddaughter echoing each other, especially after noticing the deeply hidden, unfathomable look in Shanghai Tianhua's eyes. Southern Heavenly Gate finally realized that this pavilion master had no intention of stepping forward and asking questions. He was just putting on an act for them to see. Southern Heavenly Gate even suspected that Shanghai Laner's words were secretly taught by Shanghai Tianhua in front of him. Otherwise, how could a naive girl like Shanghai Laner refute him so flawlessly and hit the nail on the head? What they didn't know was that although Shangwan Tianhua was acting, he had never taught Shangwan Laner to act with him. To be honest, Shangwan Lan had actually stepped forward to say such a thing, and even Shangwan Tianhua himself hadn't expected it. Apart from feeling gratified, Shanghai Tianhua could not help but feel a sense of pity. Although his granddaughter looked naive and innocent at first glance, she was talented and intelligent. However, he was talented, had a high level of comprehension, and was very quick-witted. He could be said to be an excellent cultivation material. It was a pity that he didn't want to improve. He didn't like boring cultivation. What would he do? Since Shangwan Tianhua had already put it this way, the Southern Heavenly Gate knew that it was futile to stay here any longer. In fact, he might even incur the ire of the First Mississippi. He had no choice but to bow respectfully and kneel down, saying, "Then, this disciple shall take his leave." Shanghai Tianhua nodded slightly. Then he did not look at him and allowed Southern Heavenly Gate to leave. Looking at Southern Heavenly Gate's back, Shangwan Lan stuck out her tongue and said, "Grandpa, that person is so bad. He actually wants to instigate you to deal with Grandpa Hong. He really has bad intentions. He probably learned a lesson from your Grandpa Hong, so he wants to borrow this old man's hand to show off his strength." Shangwan Tianhua laughed and shook his head. Although Southern Heavenly Gate was scheming and shrewd, he was still too inexperienced to play tricks in front of a top-notch big shot like him. This person thinks he can use you as a weapon, Grandpa. He thinks he's smart. In my opinion, you should teach him a lesson and let him have a long memory. Shangwan Laner said with a gloating expression. If it were some other big shot with slightly less tolerance, just because of Southern Heavenly Gate's bad intentions, in order to protect their big shot's reputation, they would not let him have an easy time. Of course, Shangwan Tianhua didn't mind at all. At his level, he already had his own way of dealing with things. He would not be angered over such a small matter. Shanghai Tianhua smiled non-committally and said, "That's not necessary. This other Heavenly Gate is not someone who will give up so easily. Since I can't do it, I will definitely think of another way when I return. However, this is not something that I need to worry about." At this point, Shangwan Tianhua suddenly paused, turning to look at Shangwan Laner with a strange look on his face. "Little Laner, in the past, you've never been interested in such schemes and plots. Why have you suddenly become so enthusiastic today? Are you also interested in that rogue cultivator Lin Air?" "Of course not. I'm obviously standing up for Grandpa Hong." Shanghai Laner quickly denied it. She did not dare to let Shanghai Tianhua know about Lin Yi. However, in her hurry, she did not notice that when Shanghai Tianhua said he was interested in the rogue cultivator Lin Air, he used the word "also" Looking at the entire 3 pavilions, there were only a handful of people who could arouse the interest of the master of the soaring pavilion. It was proven that none of them were ordinary people. For example, the current master of the law enforcement hall, Ramjia. Based on Hong Zhong's character, Shanghai Tianhua believed that he would not deliberately help Lin Air to deal with Nan Tianyong. However, it was a fact that Lin Air killed Nan Tianyong in a second. An expert at the peak of the early stage of the Foundation establishment realm was able to kill an opponent 4 levels higher than him. No matter what method he used, it was already a miracle. It was no wonder that Shanghai Tianhua, the top big shot of the North Island, would be interested in Lin Air. The next day, under the instruction of Miss Shangguan, Little Curly Bear brought the information and sneaked to Lin Yi's first cave residence at the foot of the mountain. The second of the 3 heroes of the Nan family, the senior brother in charge of the Soaring Pavilion, Southern Sky Gate, Lin Yi looked at the situation described in the letter by Shanghai Laner and could not help but be slightly surprised. He secretly sighed that Yuzha really did not give up. He had just killed Nan Tianyong and immediately pulled over an even more powerful Southern Sky Gate. Previously, using the True Chi Bomb to kill the defenseless Nan Tianyong was already Lin Yi's limit. If it was the more powerful Southern Sky Gate, or if they came prepared, then other than hiding far away, there was really no other way. However, what made Lin Yi rather touched was that Hong Zhong had only met him twice, but he was so protective of him. Without saying a word, he stepped on Nan Tianyong and the 2 heroes of the Nan family, and even almost fell to the point where the Soaring Pavilion's master, Shanghai Tianhua, came out to pressure him. This kind of favor was really touching. Although Lin Yi also knew that Hong Zhong must have done this mainly for his own sake, and Hong Zhong really did not know the details of his identity. No matter what, he still had to accept this favor. It seemed that he would have to take care of Hong Zhong's business in the future. For Lin Yi, if he could establish a stable cooperative relationship with an experienced and reliable business tycoon like Hong Zhong, it would also be a win-win situation for both sides. In addition to the Southern Sky Gate's visit last night, Shanghai Laner also analyzed the reactions of the higher-ups of the Soaring Pavilion and the Law Enforcement Hall to Lin Yi in the letter. Chapter 3854. After reading her detailed analysis in the letter, Lin Yi finally had a clear idea of the current situation. He wouldn't be caught off guard when he actually encountered Yuzha and the Southern Sky Gate, which would cause him to reveal his weakness. Other than that, Miss Shangguan also mentioned something that Lin Yi was concerned about. It was the trump card that Su Lingqiong and Meng Jueguang prepared for Meng Tong. Meridian Heart, Shattering Pill. It can let Meng Tong level up? Lin Yi couldn't help but frown. This effect was even stronger than the Foundation Establishment Pill, but his instinct as a refiner told him that there was something strange about this Meridian Heart Shattering Pill. Even the practitioners on Sky Class Island didn't know about the Meridian Heart Shattering Pill, and Lin Yi had only been here for 2 months. Of course, he wouldn't have heard of it, but logically speaking, the stronger the effect, the stronger the side effects. The Foundation Establishment Pill was already heaven-defying, and the reason why it didn't have any side effects was because the miracle Dr. Zhang Liju had spent a lot of time researching and improving it. This Meridian Heart Shattering Pill was even stronger than the Foundation Establishment Pill, so unless the refiner who created this pill had skills even higher than Zhang Liju, the side effects would definitely be terrifying. When he was in the common world, Lin Yi might have believed that there was someone on Sky Class Island who was better than Zhang Liju in elixir refinement. But now that he had seen Zhang Liju's legendary status on Sky Class Island, he had completely dispelled that thought. According to Ku by Shi Xiang, miracle Dr. Zhang Liju's skill in elixir making was unprecedented, and no one could compare to him at all. Otherwise, how could he, a practitioner from the common world with no background, be able to stand in the middle island of Sky Class, where there were so many strong practitioners, become a top-level master? From this, one could deduce that the refiner who created the Meridian Heart Shattering Pill was at most on par with Zhang Liju. It was impossible to surpass him. From the looks of it, This group of people are already unscrupulous in order to regain their face. However, I wonder if Meng Tong knows the side effects of this. Lin, he shook his head speechlessly. In his opinion, Meng Tong, this idiot, was most likely kept in the dark by Su Lingchong and Meng Jueguan. Otherwise, if he knew that there were severe side effects, even if he knew that he could directly level up by 1 level, he wouldn't be able to do so. Normal people wouldn't dare to joke around with their lives and future. However, even though Meng Tong had leveled up, he was still not much of a threat to Lin Yi. What surprised Lin Yi was that since Su Lingchong had the Meridian Heart-shattering pill, and Meng Tong's injuries were already healed, he should have been able to use it long ago. Meng Tong, on the other hand, had been keeping a low profile for the past few rounds. Lin Yi could see that the guy was still at the early phase of foundation establishment, even though his body condition was much better than before after using some kind of medicine. There were no signs of him breaking through at all. Could it be that these people wanted to hide the Meridian Heart-shattering pill until the end, and then give him a surprise at the critical moment? Lin Yi thought about it carefully. If this continued, it was quite possible. There were 6 stages in the newcomer exam, and although the challenge stage was intense, the strong ones would be able to get a lot of points. However, its influence on the rankings was far from being able to determine the outcome. There was only one thing that could have an absolute influence on the ranking. That was the final stage. Although Lin Yi had this guess in his heart, for safety's sake, he still had to remind Xiao Ran and Xiao Honkai so that they could be mentally prepared in advance, so that they wouldn't be at a disadvantage when they faced Meng Tong, who was at the early phase of foundation building. Avoiding everyone's eyes and ears, he quietly sent the little curly bear away. When Lin Yi returned to his cave abode, he found that the cave abode at the foot of the mountain was in a hubbub. Almost all the newcomers in Blue Cloud Pavilion had come out of their cave abodes and gathered together, discussing spiritedly. What's going on? Could it be that they're announcing some new rules for the newcomer exam? Lin Yi could not help but be puzzled. In the past 2 months, this was the first time he had seen such a bustling place. Not only were Meng Tong and the others making a racket, it seemed that even Xiao Ran and Xiao Honkai were among them. When Lin Yi approached the group of people with a head full of confusion, he was stunned with just a glance. Among the newcomers in Blue Cloud Pavilion, there was actually a woman, and a pretty one at that. A woman. After coming to Heaven Island for 2 months, this was the second woman Lin Yi had seen. No, strictly speaking, this was the first woman he had seen since coming to Heaven Island. Although Shanghai Laner was cute and innocent, she was at most a girl. She did not have the temperament of a mature woman. However, this woman in front of him, after 2 months of integration, even a newcomer like Lin, he had a general understanding of the situation in Heaven Island. Under normal circumstances, except for people like Shanghai Laner, the female cultivators of the 5 major islands in Heaven Island were generally concentrated in the West Island. This was an unwritten rule when teleporting, and it was also a rule within the local cultivator tribes. Unless it was the 2nd or 3rd generation of cultivators of each island, there were generally no exceptions. This also led to the gathering places of cultivators in the North Island, where there were often more men and less women, and it was extremely unbalanced. It was even more so in the Welcome Pavilion. If it were not for Shanghai Laner, the young lady, who would occasionally come over to show her face, the newcomers would not even think about seeing a woman all year round. The self-control of cultivators was far beyond that of ordinary people. Even many people had already become indifferent to the pleasures between men and women. Under normal circumstances, they would not think about women, but most of the cultivators were still normal people after all. It was natural instinct for the opposite sex to be attracted to each other. As the saying goes, after mixing with men for a long time, even if you see a sow, you will feel that you are handsome. What's more, the one who appeared in front of everyone now was a living woman, and she could be considered a beauty. But why would such a woman come here? When Lin Yi could not help but feel puzzled, senior brother Ku Bai, Xiao Ran, and Xiao Honkai had already squeezed to his side. Lin Yi could not help but ask, "What's going on? Could it be that a woman from a family brought her here to play?" This was the most normal speculation. If it was not like Shanghai Laner who came to play, Could it be that she was a new disciple of the Welcome Pavilion? Chapter 3855. More importantly, Lin Yi could clearly see the woman's strength. She was an expert at the peak of the early stage of the foundational building realm. Although Lin Yi's golden finger was limited after he obtained the heavenly axiom, he could still see the levels of cultivators who were weaker than him. Putting aside the two stewards, Meng Jueguang and senior brother Ku Bai, as well as Lin Yi, who had hidden his strength, this woman could easily look down on everyone. With such strength, why would she come to the welcoming pavilion? She could directly enter the three great pavilions. However, senior brother Ku Bai's answer stunned Lin Yi. Junior brother Lin, you're wrong. This woman's name is Murong Zhen. She's not here to play. From today onwards, she's a newcomer to the Blue Cloud Pavilion. Huh? Lin Yi could not help but be stunned. This situation was the most impossible possibility, but he did not expect it to come true. What was going on? It had been more than 2 months since then, but a disciple was added halfway through. Moreover, it was a female disciple, and a female disciple at the peak of the early stage of the foundational building realm. I don't know why this female disciple was suddenly sent here. Anyway, this is a special case, and the higher-ups tacitly approved it. After a pause, senior brother Ku Bai mysteriously whispered to Lin Yi and the others. It's said that this woman has a powerful background. She's a distant relative of Elder Murong from the Soaring Pavilion. She's been in her hometown for a long time, but because she's quite strong, she was brought here recently. Senior brother Ku Bai's words did not dispel Lin Yi's doubts. Instead, he became even more puzzled. Since she was a relative of Elder Murong from the Soaring Pavilion, even if she was a distant relative, she could be considered a real second or third generation cultivator. With her current strength, if she wanted to join the three great pavilions, there was no need for her to go through the trouble of coming to the welcoming pavilion. Even if she really wanted to go through the motions, she should have gone to the Soaring Pavilion. Why did she come to the Blue Cloud Pavilion for no reason? There was probably something strange about this. Just as Lin Yi, senior brother Ku Bai, and the others were discussing, they heard the other newcomers of Blue Cloud Pavilion suddenly quiet down. Following that, they saw the crowd part to the side. This woman, who was the center of attention, walked gracefully in front of Lin Yi. Are you the Lin Yi they were talking about? Let me introduce myself. My name is Murong Zhen. If you don't mind, you can call me Jin Zhen. Murong Zhen's pretty eyes were filled with lust as she extended her slender hand to Lin Yi. Gulp! The crowd couldn't help but swallow their saliva. In their hearts, they were all envious of Lin Yi's luck with women. To be able to shake hands with Murong Zhen was a blessing that could not be obtained in a few lifetimes. Not only was Murong Zhen a beauty, but she was also a powerful female cultivator. There were even well-informed people who said that her family background was unfathomable and that she was a true third-generation cultivator. It was impossible for Murong Zhen not to become the center of attention when she was 3 different people. If he could gain her favor, not only would he be able to win the heart of a beauty, but he would also be able to become the son-in-law of a dragon. From then on, he would be able to reach the sky in a single bound, and he would be able to save a lot of effort. Before Lin Yi arrived, many people, including Meng Tong, tried to strike up a conversation with her. Unfortunately, Murong Zhen did not even look at them, let alone take the initiative to shake hands with them. However, as soon as Lin Yi showed up, Murong Zhen took the initiative to introduce herself. She even took the initiative to extend her hand. The difference in treatment between the two was like heaven and earth. Meng Tong and the others were heartbroken. At first, the crowd thought, since Murong Zhen took the initiative, Lin Yi would definitely take advantage of the situation without hesitation. He would grab her slender hand and enjoy his luck with women. But what made everyone's jaws drop was that Lin Yi didn't do anything about it. Hello, I am Lin Yi. Lin Yi nodded with his arms crossed. He had no intention of shaking hands with her and responded calmly. Fuck, there must be something wrong with this pretentious guy's brain. Didn't they say this guy is a lecher? Why is he rejecting her when when she's right in front of him? Is he addicted to acting tough? Meng Tong and the others were in an uproar. All of them were surprised, and their faces were filled with schadenfreude. Fortunately, Lin Yi was sick in the head. Otherwise, if he really took the opportunity to hook up with the great beauty Murongzhen, then all of them would be heartbroken. Murongzhen obviously did not expect Lin Yi to react this way. She was slightly startled and chuckled awkwardly. She then retracted her hand that was reaching out to Lin Yi. Due to the scarcity of women, ever since she came to the three great pavilions, no matter where she went, she was undoubtedly the center of attention. Even in the circle of the second generation of the Soaring Sky Pavilion, she could easily attract the attention of many young masters, and this even included Su Lingchong, the young master who was extremely valuable. Originally, everything was wonderful. Just when Murongzhen thought it would always be wonderful because of a party in Huayang House, just because of a moment of anger, the situation suddenly took a turn for the worse. Not only did she lose the attention of many young masters, she also became the target of public criticism. Almost all of the young masters in the Soaring Sky Pavilion were ostracized. That was not all. Today, she was sent to the Welcoming Pavilion for no reason. Moreover, it was the Blue Cloud Pavilion, a place where even birds wouldn't poop. How could she endure this? Murongzhen gritted her teeth in hatred when she thought of this. Back at Huayang residence, didn't I tell you the truth that you can't bring pets? You second and third generations. In order to please that little girl, Shangguan Laner, do you have to hit me when I'm down? Do you have to be so unscrupulous? Shangguan Laner, isn't she born with a good grandfather? So what? Even if I'm not as good as her in terms of family background, but in terms of temperament, appearance, and strength, how could that little girl compare to me? Shangguan Laner and those blind young masters, just wait and see. I'll make them pay 100-fold. When the time comes, none of you can escape. Women were the creatures that should never be provoked, especially Murongzhen, a scheming and shrewd woman. Once provoked, the consequences would be unimaginable. However, even though she was ostracized by the young masters in the Soaring Sky Pavilion because she offended Shangguan Laner, Murongzhen never thought that she would be treated coldly when she came to the Welcoming Pavilion and faced the new people in the Blue Cloud Pavilion. In fact, from Meng Jueguang to the rookies, all of them showed great enthusiasm towards this beauty. They fawned on her in every possible way, allowing her to quickly regain the feeling of being the center of attention. Chapter 3856. If it were anyone else here, Murongzhen wouldn't even need to take the initiative to extend her hand. Just a simple glance from her would make them kneel down and lick her feet. No one would be as cold as Lin Yi, not even willing to extend his hand. Even though it was a little awkward, Murongzhen quickly regained her composure. She said coquettishly, "In the future, we'll all be newcomers to Blue Cloud Pavilion. I'm just a weak woman who has no one to rely on. Brother Lin, you must remember to take care of me." The coquettish voice seeped into their bones, and since they hadn't seen a woman in a long time, even these practitioners with strong self-control couldn't help but feel their hearts fluttering. They wanted nothing more than to be in Lin Yi's place and pull this soft beauty into their arms, taking care of her. Lin Yi's response to this was a non-committal smile. He didn't have any intentions of responding at all. This scene once again made everyone's jaws drop. If they had thought that Lin Yi was stupid and didn't know how to appreciate favors, now they didn't think that way anymore. When they recalled the rumors that Lin Yi had countless girlfriends in the secular world, the crowd could not help but think that it was not that Lin Yi did not want to bother with a beautiful woman, Murongzhen. He was just acting cool out of habit and preparing to play hard to get, as high and mighty cultivators, even if it was difficult for them to gain the favor of female cultivators of the same cultivation level. Their status among ordinary people was undeniable. If they really wanted to, people like them would definitely not lack women. Naturally, they had their own way of dealing with women, playing hard to get. As long as the situation was controlled well, not only could this move leave a deep impression on the other party, it was also more useful than trying to please them. However, the prerequisite for using this move was that the person himself must possess sufficient attractiveness. In the world of cultivation where the strong were revered, the person must possess sufficient strength. At the same time, the person must also possess a powerful background. Otherwise, it would only produce the opposite effect. In terms of strength, although Lin Yi's strength was not bad compared to the newcomers in Blue Cloud Pavilion, he was only in the early stage of the Foundation establishment realm. Murong Jun, on the other hand, was an expert in the early stage of the Foundation establishment realm. She was superior. In terms of background, Lin Yi was just a grassroots newcomer in the secular world. Even if everyone present was a grassroots loose cultivator, their background and strength were much better than Lin Yi's. After all, no matter how poor they were, as local cultivators, they still had friends and relatives. Moreover, this Murong beauty was rumored to be related to Elder Murong of the Soaring Pavilion. Her background was unreachable to anyone here, let alone a weakling like Lin Yi who had come from the common world. Let's wait and see. Sooner or later, this pretentious old man will shoot himself in the foot. When that time comes, it'll be interesting when Beauty Murong steps on him. Meng Tong sneered. Beside him, Li Jingming couldn't help but grin when he heard this. Did Boss Lin Yi really have some thoughts about this Morongjin? He wasn't sure, but at least he knew one thing. If they really fought, Boss Lin Yi would definitely trample his opponent to death in a matter of minutes. There was no doubt about this. Therefore, in his opinion, Meng Tong's self-indulgent thoughts could only be described with one word: naive. However, he obviously wouldn't say this out loud. He just cooperated with the cold sneer. Of course, the target of this sneer was not Lin Yi, but the newcomer Meng Tong. Seeing that Lin Yi didn't respond to her, Murong Jun was a little annoyed. This guy, why didn't he take the initiative to give face? The reason why she took the initiative to express her goodwill to Lin was because she saw that Lin Yi was stronger than everyone else. Moreover, the other newcomers of Blue Cloud Pavilion seemed to be quite afraid of him. She felt that this person was not simple and could be used. She originally thought that this kind of thing would be a piece of cake for a great beauty like her. She thought that she could easily make Lin Yi kneel under her skirt. She didn't expect that Lin Yi would be so unreasonable. He turned a blind eye to her in public twice. Did this guy think that he was a super rich young master like Su Lingsheng? Could it be that he really wanted a great beauty like her to take the initiative to throw herself at him? You're just an early-stage Foundation establishment cultivator with no background. It's already a blessing that this lady is willing to look at you for a few lifetimes. And you want this beauty to throw herself at you? Bah, you're not worthy. Although she was annoyed in her heart, there were so many people watching. Moreover, this was the first time she appeared in front of everyone. Murong Jun didn't want to lose her poise and affect her image. She had not given up yet. Even if she was inhumanely sent to Blue Cloud Pavilion as a newcomer, Murong Jun didn't have the slightest intention of giving up. She still wanted to stay in Welcome Pavilion for a period of time. She wanted to take the opportunity to recruit a few powerful newcomers with a bright future. She wanted to prepare to deal with Shanghai Laner in the future. If she wanted to deal with Shanghai Laner, the high and mighty lady, the newcomers of Blue Cloud Pavilion would definitely not be of much use. However, they were not completely useless. When the time came, she could set up a plan to use them as cannon fodder. Because of Lin Yi's cold reaction, Murong Jun was embarrassed and annoyed. Next to her, Meng Jueguang, the senior who was in charge, took the initiative to help her out of this predicament. All right, everyone quiet down. Let me formally introduce everyone. Meng Jueguang pretended to be gentle and smiled at Murong Jun. Then he loudly introduced, from today onwards, Lady Murong is officially a newcomer of Blue Cloud Pavilion. Like everyone else, she will be participating in the newcomer assessment. As for the assessment that she has already gone through, there is no need to make up for it alone. After a pause, Meng Jueguang continued. Also, because the 15 caves at the foot of the mountain are already full, according to the orders of the higher-ups, we are to build a wooden house for Lady Murong as a temporary residence. Hearing this, Everyone looked at each other. If they said that they weren't the least bit confused about Murongzhen's arrival, they would definitely be lying. With Murongzhen's strength and background, if she wanted to join the three great pavilions, it would be a simple matter. The fact that she joined Welcome Pavilion halfway through was already strange enough. Moreover, she did not join Soaring Sky Pavilion, but Blue Cloud Pavilion. Because of this, even if she left Welcome Pavilion in the future, according to the three great pavilions rules, she could only become an inner disciple of Blue Cloud Pavilion and not an inner disciple of Soaring Sky Pavilion. The difference in treatment between the two was huge. For Murongzhen, who was supposed to become an inner disciple of Soaring Sky Pavilion, this was simply inhumane and merciless suppression. Whether it was the space between her eyebrows or the way she walked, she gave off a coquettish aura. If his judgment was correct, this woman's nightlife should be frequent and chaotic. Heaven-ranked Island was not as open as the secular world. There were still a lot of ancient customs, and they were very strict about keeping a distance between men and women. Under such a background, a woman like Murongzhen could not be considered a good person at all. Right now, Lin Yi was wholeheartedly focused on cultivating and leveling up. He would go to Zhongdao and find Zhang Liju. He didn't have time to waste with this woman. However, what Lin Yi didn't know was that for some narrow-minded women, his behavior of keeping a respectful distance from them was a sign of respect. That was enough to make people hate him. All right, if there's nothing urgent, then let's show our manly spirit. Come and help build a house for our junior sister Moro. Meng Juiguang called out to everyone. All right, in order to leave a good impression in front of Beauty Morong, the rookies of Blue Cloud Pavilion scrambled to be the first. They were afraid of falling behind. Xiao ran, Xiao Honkai, and the others didn't follow the others immediately. Instead, they stayed and waited for Lin Yi's instructions. Let's go. Since we're all rookies of Blue Cloud Pavilion, let's go help as well. Lin Yi smiled faintly. He didn't want to interact too much with this Murongzhen, but they were all rookies of Blue Cloud Pavilion. Even if it was just out of consideration for his face, he had to help. Of course, with so many people scrambling to go, even if Lin Yi and the others went, they would only be there to help. Building a wooden house was just a small matter for practitioners like them. In just half an hour, under the efforts of the rookies of Blue Cloud Pavilion, a wooden house was erected in the empty space in front of the cave at the foot of the mountain. Although it was a little rough and the feeling of living in it wouldn't be great, apart from the spiritual energy, the requirements of a cultivator's external environment were not high, so they could make do with it. As for the spiritual energy, with Murongzhen's strength at the peak of the early stage of the foundation establishment realm, even the best cave at the foot of the mountain, the first cave was far from enough to satisfy her cultivation needs, let alone the small wooden house. Therefore, in theory, to Murongzhen, the effects of the caves and the small wooden house were the same. They were close to zero. Of course, the small wooden house was only temporary to her. If she intended to fight in the upcoming competition, the one who would stay in the small wooden house might be an unlucky soul. Regarding this point, the Clear Cloud Pavilion's new disciples who were mesmerized by Murongzhen had yet to react. All they could think of at the moment was how to win Murongzhen's favor. As long as they could please Murongzhen, not only would they gain the beauty's favor, but they would also have a backer. Why not? Putting aside Murongzhen's powerful background, she was a true expert at the peak of the early stage of the Foundation establishment realm. With this kind of strength, she could easily defeat all the rookies of Welcome Pavilion, including Lin Yi, even if they were suspected of living off a woman. If they could find a way to hug such a thick thigh, the situation would be wonderful. After building the wooden house for Murongzhen, the rookies of Blue Cloud Pavilion quickly dispersed, except for a few who wanted to please Murongzhen with ulterior motives. They still had to prepare for the next round of the competition, and they still had to spend vital qi to cultivate the spiritual herb seeds. There were many things they needed to worry about, so they did not have much time to waste. As for Murongzhen, a beauty who had descended from the sky, to most of them, She was merely a feast for their eyes at most. With their abilities and conditions, it was completely unrealistic for them to win the heart of the beauty. No matter how tempted they were, they still knew where they stood. Chapter 38:58. There were countless examples of brothers falling out because of a woman. Although Xiao Ran and Xiao Honkai had good characters, if they were to be seduced by this woman and sow discord between them, it would be hard to say what would happen next. Lin, he had to be on guard against this, so he had to give them a heads up. Don't worry, boss. We'll do whatever you want. Xiao Ran and Xiao Honkai nodded without hesitation. Admittedly, after spending so much time in the welcome pavilion with men, Murong Jun was more or less attractive to them, but it was not to the point where they would fall for her. Needless to say, Xiao Ran had seen all kinds of fickleness in the secular world since he was young. His calmness, rationality, and self-control were unquestionable. On the other hand, although Xiao Honkai looked pure and hot-blooded, it could be seen from the way he dealt with Meng Tong during the challenge that he was a meticulous person. He was not someone who would be easily taken advantage of. Back in the cave abode, Lin habitually entered the space in the jade pendant. Apart from his daily cultivation, his most important task now was to take care of the two heart-devouring, exquisite grasses that had just sprouted. As these were seeds cultivated in batches by the Spirit Medicine Nursery using a special method, they belonged to the category of plants that were congenitally deficient. Furthermore, the method of instilling vital energy into them changed their growth cycle, which was a form of destruction to the spiritual medicine seeds that were already lacking in vital energy. Therefore, normally speaking, the quality of the spiritual medicine cultivated in this way was poor and could not reach the average standard. It was rare for him to obtain two heart-devouring exquisite grasses seeds, but in the end, he could only cultivate two malnourished heart-devouring exquisite grasses. This result was clearly unacceptable to Lin Yi. Fortunately, the space in the jade pendant was filled with sufficient spiritual energy. To a large extent, it made up for his congenitally deficient inferiority. Although the quality was not very good, it could still reach the average standard. What Lenny needed to do now was to continue taking care of these two heart-devouring exquisite grasses. Then he could start to refine the foundation-building pill. Apart from the two stalks of heart-devouring exquisite grass, he didn't directly hand over the rest of the seedlings that had sprouted in the space of the jade pendant to exchange for points. Instead, he left them here and returned the seedlings in batches. The reason why they had to be sent in batches was because this was also to avoid arousing suspicion. After all, when the others took the seedlings back, they didn't have a unique golden finger like Lin Yi's jade space. They wouldn't be able to grow the spiritual medicine seedlings in their hands at all, so they could only hand them all over at once. If he really did that, when that time came, Xiao Ran, Xiao Honkai, Li Zhongming, and even Zhong Pingliang from the Soaring Pavilion would hand over 10 or more seedlings at once under the background that everyone else couldn't even grow a single seed. It would be impossible not to attract attention. When that time came, if someone really wanted to investigate, not only would the secret of them cultivating the spiritual medicine seedlings be exposed, but more importantly, Zhong Pingliang and Li Zhongming might also be exposed as spies. That would be troublesome. So, for the sake of safety, Lenny could only choose to make it a little more troublesome and let them hand over the seedlings in batches, as long as they didn't meet at the same time. Moreover, if each person hit a few seedlings, it wouldn't matter even if their survival rate was much higher than the others. Back then, the sissy manager of the Spirit Medicine Nursery had already said that cultivating spiritual medicine seedlings not only depended on strength and skill, but also luck. If a few people had a higher survival rate, the others could only be envious. At most, they would suspect that these people had mastered some key tricks or something, but they wouldn't think too much about it. The spiritual medicine seedlings of Xiao Ran and the others. He had them hand over the seedlings in batches. He himself had 39 seedlings other than the heart-devouring exquisite grass. He didn't hand them over in batches, but kept them in the jade space, planning to take them out at the end. When that time came, many people would be blinded, especially people like Kong Ming Ming, who was waiting to see him make a fool of himself. Lin, he was looking forward to it. At night, when Lin, he was cultivating, his heart suddenly moved. Someone was touching his cave house's restriction. Looking for him at this time, could it be that Li Zhengming had some new information? This was Lin Yi's first reaction, but when he opened the door and saw the person standing in front of him, Lin, he couldn't help but be stunned. Big brother Lin, my wooden house is transparent. Can I borrow your cave house to take a bath? The weather is so hot, and my body is so sticky, it's uncomfortable. Murong Zhen was wearing thin clothes, leaning against the door, and her eyes were seductively looking at Lin Yi. Lin Yi looked at her coldly and raised his eyebrows. What is this honey trap? I'm sorry, I don't think there's water in my cave house. Lin Yi rejected her calmly. He had to admit that Murong Zhen was quite pretty. Even though Lin Yi was used to seeing all kinds of beautiful women, he had to admit that she was one of a kind. However, not only was Lin Yi not interested in this kind of woman, but he was even more vigilant. Once he got too close to this woman, needless to say, he would be in trouble, and it would be impossible for him to avoid her. Lin Yi didn't know why this Murong Zhen was trying to seduce him like this, but there was one thing he was sure of. There was definitely something fishy going on, and this woman was definitely up to no good. Seeing that Lin Yi's reaction was as cold as during the day, Murong Zhen, who thought that she would be able to make him submit, couldn't help but be stunned again. After half a day, with her ability, it was easy for her to find out the current situation of the newcomers in Blue Cloud Pavilion. From her point of view, although Meng Tong had Meng Jueguang backing him, in terms of strength, he was still far inferior to Lin Yi's group. Summing up all the things that had happened to Lin Yi, she realized that this newcomer from the secular world was not only far stronger than the other newcomers, but his potential was also not to be underestimated. Just by relying on his own strength, he was able to make Meng Jueguang, the steward, helpless. How could this be something that an ordinary person could do? This man was not simple. This was Murong Zhen's judgment of Lin Yi after summing up the information provided by the newcomers. Because of this, after being given the cold shoulder during the day, she had to swallow her pride and take the initiative to seduce Lin Yi at night when there was no one around. Chapter 38:59. Lin Yi, who seemed to be quite capable, was obviously a good choice. Moreover, Lin Yi had a grudge against Su Lingchong, so he was naturally on her side. As for how to get Lin Yi on their side, it was an easy task for Murong Zhen. For a beauty like her body was the best method. Murong Zhen would never complain about having too many guests under her veil. If it was necessary, she would not even mind giving the other party a taste of sweetness, just like the current situation. From her point of view, for a man like Lin Yi who liked to act cool, it was understandable that he was so cold to her in front of so many people during the day. If he acted like a pervert, it might damage the image he had built up previously. Now, in the dead of night, there was no one around, and she, a beautiful woman, had taken the initiative to come to him. There should be no need for him to pretend anymore. In the end, it was completely out of Murong Zhen's expectations. It was just the two of them, a man and a woman. She had already hinted so openly, but Lin Yi was still pretending and did not hurry to snatch her in. Murong Zhen couldn't help but suspect that there was something wrong with this guy's head. Or could it be that he was sick in that aspect and was not interested in women? Otherwise, there was no reason for him to resist her temptation. Murong Zhen quickly calmed herself down when she saw Lin Yi looking at her coldly. She did not give up and licked her lips seductively. She said coquettishly, "If there's no water, we can go outside and get it. Brother Lin, you can't possibly bear to see a weak lady like me fetch water by herself, right? My body is sticky right now. It's really uncomfortable if I don't bathe." If it was any other newcomer in the Blue Cloud Pavilion, like Meng Tong, who was simple-minded, when Murong Zhen said that, he would probably be impatient to get his hands on her and rush to be her subject. Unfortunately, Murong Zhen was not facing anyone else but Lin Yi. Murong-jun stroked his hair coquettishly as if there was no one else around. She purposely put on all sorts of seductive poses that would make any man's nose bleed. Lenny couldn't help but sigh. This woman really wouldn't stop until she got what she wanted. Miss Murong, it's getting late. In addition, men and women should not touch each other. Your request is indeed somewhat inconvenient. Forgive me for being powerless. Please leave. Lin, he shook his head indifferently. You. Murong-jun could not help but feel angry. Her already towering chest heaved up and down. Pointing at Lin, he was speechless for a long time. Over the years, Murong-jun had captured more than 10 women. She had always been extremely confident in her beauty. Moreover, she understood men very well. As long as she gave them a little sweetness, they would definitely take the bait. This trick of seduction, whether it was in her hometown or in the 3 great pavilions, had never failed her. Murong-jun had always been a tried and tested woman. If she had not offended Shangwan Lan'er, she would have been like a fish in water by now and become a famous lady in the 3 pavilions who was the center of attention, even if she was sent to the welcoming pavilion. Judging from the reactions of the newcomers in the Blue Cloud Pavilion, in Murong-jun's eyes, these people were nothing more than trash that she could summon at her beck and call. However, Murong-jun never thought that her time-tested seduction trick would work. In front of Lin Yi from the secular world, it had no effect at all. He did not even take the initiative to throw himself at her. How could a great beauty like her endure that? No matter how slutty she was, Murong-jun was still a woman in the end. When she failed to attract a man by offering her body to seduce him, it was definitely a fatal blow to her. The consequences were also extremely terrifying. Murong-jun pointed at Lin Yi for a long time in exasperation. Then, she said angrily, "Are you a man or not? Don't you know what it means to have tender feelings for the fair sex? Aren't you just a commoner from the secular world? What's there to be arrogant about? I'm giving you a chance because I'm flattering you. Otherwise, I wouldn't even bother to look at trash like you who doesn't have the strength or background. If that's the case, then it's my honor." Lin Yi smiled faintly, not denying it. "Isn't that so? An idiot like you who doesn't know how to flirt, I'm sure that you'll never be able to hook up with any woman in this lifetime. You can just wait to be a bachelor for the rest of your life." Murong-jun paused for a moment, then added, "Even if there are, they'll at most be those commoners who have never seen the world. They're trash who can't even compare to a single toe of mine. Then I'm really sorry. My girlfriends might not be the most beautiful, but they're more than enough compared to you, Lady Murong." Lin Yi's expression turned serious as he sneered. Initially, he wanted to pretend to be polite to Murong-jun. Even if he did not want to get too close to her, there was no need to make things so bad that they were like fire and water. No matter what, Murong-jun was quite strong and had a powerful background. It was best not to provoke him. However, now that Murong-jun had called his girlfriends trash, Lin Yi did not plan to pretend that he did not hear it. After all, women had always been Lin Yi's reverse scale. Well water does not interfere with river water. This was Lin Yi's original plan. Now that Murong-jun had touched his reverse scale, there was nothing more to say. So what if you're an expert at the peak of the early stage of the foundation building realm? So what if you have the support of an elder from the Soaring Sky Pavilion? Chapter 3860. Oomph. I put down my pride and try to be nice to you. Since you don't know what's good for you, don't blame me for being rude. I forgot to tell you that in my heart, if you can't be my friend, then you're my enemy. I won't let any of my enemies live so leisurely. Murong-jun sneered. This time, she was really angry out of humiliation. The aura of an expert at the peak of the early stage of the foundation building realm poured out of her body, without reservation, and pressed down on Lin Yi's head. No matter how weak she pretended to be, she was still an expert at the peak of the early stage of the foundation building realm. To her, dealing with Lin Yi, who was merely an expert at the early stage of the foundation building realm, was a piece of cake. Women were not to be trifled with. A woman like her, who was not broad-minded but was not weak, was even more so. I'll ask you one last time. Are you going to be my friend or my enemy? Think carefully before you answer this question. Otherwise, you'll regret it. I promise. Morongjun said coldly. Hee. Seduction didn't work. So you're trying to threaten me? This is only her first day in the Welcome Pavilion, but she can't wait to build her own force. This woman seems to be plotting something big. He couldn't help but laugh in his heart when he saw this. However, his face remained indifferent. Under the pressure of Morongjun's aura, He paused for a moment. Then, he replied with a normal expression, Miss Morong, well, water doesn't interfere with river water. I have no intention of being your enemy. However, if you insist on doing this, then I'll have to reluctantly do it. Hey, reluctantly do it? You're just an early stage of the foundation-building realm from the secular world. Do you have the right to say such things in front of me? You're too arrogant. Morongjun was about to attack him angrily. If he wasn't a friend, then he was an enemy. There was no third possibility. As for what He said about not interfering with each other's business, in Morongjun's eyes, it was a load of bullshit. If she wanted to take revenge on Shangguan, she needed to accumulate strength and influence at all costs. There were only a few people who had the potential to be her cannon fodder. Among these people like Meng Tong were Meng Jueguang's direct subordinates, and Meng Jueguang was Su Lingchong's man. Morongjun, had no way of contending against them in a short period of time. In other words, even if she lowered her status and took the initiative to seduce them, it would still be impossible for her to make Meng Tong and the others truly loyal to her. At most, she could make use of them behind young Master Su's back. But Yi and the others were different. They were real grassroots. Morongjun did not have any powerful background or backing. As long as she played some tricks, it was very possible for her to make these people worship her. If he wanted to subdue Yi and his gang, the most crucial step was naturally to subdue Yi. To catch a thief, one must first capture the leader. As long as he could subdue Yi, his subordinates, Xiao Ran and Xiao Hongkai, would naturally be easy to deal with. Moreover, from Morongjun's point of view, Yi was indeed the most capable and had the most potential among all the newcomers. After subduing him, if there were any opportunities in the future, perhaps he could really become a top figure. Therefore, subduing Yi was a must for Morongjun. Even though she was treated coldly during the day, now that it was nighttime, she still lowered her status and took the initiative to seduce him. She decided to lower herself to seduce Yi. If necessary, she wouldn't mind giving Yi a taste of sweetness. After all, Morongjun had always been very confident in herself. Her plan was perfect, but unfortunately, everything had already become fleeting. Since seducing him did not work, she could only change her way of thinking. If the soft approach did not work, she would use the hard approach. She would use her strength to force Yi to yield. In the cultivation world, the strong had always been respected. She believed that Yi would fall for that too. Just as Morongjun was about to use her strength to subdue Yi suddenly spoke. Is this really okay? If you fight without reporting it, you will be severely punished in the Welcome Pavilion. Lady Morong, aren't you afraid that someone will kick you when you're down? As he spoke, Yi's expression was calm, as usual. He did not seem to be flustered at all. It seemed like he was merely giving a casual reminder. If Morongjun insisted on not listening to him, he would not mind playing along with her until the end. Hearing that, Morongjun's aura froze. She could not help but shiver when she regained her senses. Just as Yi had said, her current situation was not good. Originally, she could have become a member of the inner circle of the Soaring Sky Pavilion second generation, but now, she was suddenly knocked down to the ground, becoming a lowly Clear Cloud Pavilion newcomer without any status. If she committed any crime at this time, she believed that those who banished her to the Clear Cloud Pavilion, in order to curry favor with Shangguan and Su Lingchong, would not mind stepping on her again, adding insult to injury. If that happened, Morongjun might be blacklisted by Welcome Pavilion. When that time comes, she might not even be able to enter Blue Cloud Pavilion. She would be completely cut off from the three great pavilions. That would be a real tragedy. she would never have the chance to turn the tables in her life. Thinking of this, Morong-jun quickly withdrew her aura and glared at Lin Yi. It was all because of this arrogant and despicable bastard that I almost made a huge mistake. Just you wait, this beauty. You'll regret it. Morong-jun said with a face full of hatred. She then turned around and left. Her seduction did not work, and she could not threaten him with force. If she continued to stay here, she would only be asking for trouble. Looking at Morong-jun's enchanting figure, Lin Yi took a deep breath. This is ridiculous. She failed to seduce me, and now she's threatening me? If it weren't for Lin Yi killing her now, it would be too troublesome. Otherwise, she would be dead by now. Lin Yi didn't want to expose his strength before the Southern Sky Gates matter was settled, but the girl was already in his blacklist. Although there might be trouble in the future, there was nothing he could do now that things had come to this. This woman was not a good person anyway. So be it. Lin Yi had enemies all over the place. One more wouldn't make a difference. What Lin Yi did not know was that even if he did not offend Morong-jun today, he would still end up on the opposite side of Morong-jun and Shangwan Laner in the future. What he did now was to clarify the relationship between him and her. However, it did not matter. He would deal with the situation as it came. Lin Yi shook his head and smiled. He then entered the space inside the jade pendant and continued to cultivate as if nothing had happened. Taking advantage of the fact that the heart-devouring exquisite herb seedling had yet to mature, Lin Yi needed to stabilize his cultivation base at the peak of the early stage of the foundation building realm. He also needed to strengthen his foundation as much as possible in preparation for his breakthrough. Chapter 3861. Even though Lin Yi had consumed a foundation-building pill that had no side effects, if he did not cultivate diligently, it would still cause his strength to be unstable. After all, there was a huge difference between experts of the same level. The reason why Lin Yi was so far ahead was because of his hard work. While Lin Yi was cultivating diligently in the space within the Jade Pendant, accumulating his foundation for his next breakthrough, what he did not know was that the two most troublesome enemies he was facing had met. After being snubbed at the Flower Mist residence, just as Shangwan Tianhua had predicted, the Southern Heaven Gate did not give up just like that. Although there were not many important figures that could help him put pressure on Hong Zhong, Shangwan Tianhua was not the only one in the Soaring Sky Pavilion. For example, one of the members of the Elders' Council of the Three Great Pavilions, the third elder of the Soaring Pavilion, Su Yuanzhong, also had the ability to do so. This time, the Southern Sky Gate did not visit Su Yuanzhong alone like he did with Shanghai Tianhua. After all, Su Yuanzhong was different from Shanghai Tianhua. Although he was also one of the few big shots in the Soaring Pavilion, he was only the third elder, not the Pavilion Master. Shanghai Tianhua was undoubtedly the leader of the Soaring Pavilion. If the Southern Sky Gate visited him, no one would be able to find any fault with him. However, if he visited Su Yuanzhong alone, it would be easy for people to think that he was siding with someone else. However, this did not stop him from asking for help from Su Yuanzhong, the third elder of the Soaring Pavilion, because Su Yuanzhong had a well-known spokesperson, his grandson, Su Lingchong. Through young master Su Lingchong's words, the South Heaven Gate could also achieve its goal without taking any unnecessary risks. The place where the Southern Sky Gate and Su Lingchong had agreed to meet. It was the #1 restaurant in the Soaring Pavilion, the Hualan residence. Young Master Su, aren't you overestimating the Southern Sky Gate by spending so much money to invite him to a banquet? The young master sitting next to Su Lingchong asked in confusion. This person was called Lu Tianyu, the same as Su Lingchong. He was the grandson of a powerful elder in the Soaring Pavilion. However, his grandfather was ranked below Su Yuanzhong. According to the rules of the second generation, his status was slightly lower than Su Lingchong's. He had an extremely close relationship with Su Lingchong. The relationship between the two of them was also extremely deep. Within the circle, they were Su Lingchong's most reliable and most reliant subordinates. Basically, wherever Su Lingchong was around, he was the real second in command. As for people like Kong Ming Ming and Meng Juewang, who were Su Lingchong's new underlings, Su Lingchong's subordinates, their statuses were far below his, and they could not be compared. Tianyu, what do you think my intention is by inviting the South Heaven Gate to a feast? Su Lingchong asked with a profound look. Isn't this the guy who sent you a message, asking you to help pass a message to the third elder? Lu Tianyu might be Su Lingchong's loyal follower, and his strength and family background were also not bad. But this young master never liked to use his brain. Su Lingchong couldn't help but laugh when he heard that. He asked this young master to help bring a message, so he should be the one to treat me to a meal. Why should this young master spend so much money to entertain him? This young master is not sick in the head. Then, why is this? Lu Tianyu scratched his head in confusion. The reason is simple. He's the eldest senior brother of the Soaring Sky Pavilion, while I'm the second senior brother of the Soaring Sky Pavilion. I'm ranked below him, Su Lingchong said with a profound smile. So what? You're treating him like this just because you're ranked below him? With young Master Su's background, isn't it only a matter of time for you to step on him? Previously, your strength was slightly weaker, so it's not a big deal to let him be the eldest senior brother of the Soaring Sky Pavilion. However, now that young Master Su has also reached the peak foundation establishment realm, what's there to be afraid of? Lu Tianyu was even more confused. 2 months ago, when young Master Su went to welcome the newcomers as the envoy of the Soaring Sky Pavilion, he was only at the peak late foundation stage. However, after 2 months, with the help of various pills, he had reached the peak foundation establishment stage. He was only a step away from the golden core stage, just like the South Heaven Gate's eldest senior brother who was in charge of the Soaring Sky Pavilion. Hearing Lu Tianyu's doubt, Su Lingchong couldn't help but laugh. Tianyu, aren't you very clear about it? I'll be frank with you. The reason I invited the Southern Heaven Gate to a feast today is to tell him that I'm now an expert at the peak foundation establishment realm. It's time for him to give up his position as the eldest senior brother of the Soaring Sky Pavilion. I see. I knew it. Our young Master Su isn't the kind of person to let others take advantage of him. There's a deeper meaning to it. Lu Tianyu burst out laughing, but then frowned and said, however, that Southern Heaven Gate does have some background. Would he really give up his position just because young Master Su said that? We'll have to see if he knows what's good for him. It's better to be polite before resorting to force. Today's feast is just a greeting. There's still more to come. Su Lingchong harumphed coldly. Even young Master Su was slightly afraid of the background of the 3 heroes of the Nan clan. Unless he had no other choice, he didn't want to become enemies with the 3 heroes of the Nan clan. However, as a cultivator, his own interests came first. If the 3 heroes of the Nan clan were so stupid as to block his path, then Su Lingchong didn't mind paying a small price to trample on them. You guys are always scheming and scheming. I'm sick of it. Anyway, when the time comes, I'll do whatever young Master Su tells me. Lu Tianyu scratched his head as if he had a headache. Then his expression changed, and he said excitedly, let's not talk about these troublesome things. Young Master Su, let me tell you something fun. What's fun? Su Lingchong raised his eyebrows in surprise. When these young masters gathered together, they rarely did anything serious. Basically, they just had all sorts of fun. Lu Tianyu, this guy, was the one who liked to play around the most. Murong Zhen, that blind slut, was trampled all the way to the new welcoming pavilion by me. Not only that, I even made her a new disciple of the Clear Cloud Pavilion. Even if she comes out from the new welcoming pavilion, she can only go to the Clear Cloud Pavilion, that kind of trash shelter. Young Master Su, don't you think that's fun? Lu Tianyu said with a smug smile. Chapter 3862. Ever since Murong Zhen arrived at the 3 great pavilions, she had been trying her best to attract the attention of the young master from the Soaring Pavilion, especially Su Lingchong, who was an extremely important young master. However, the sad thing was that although Su Lingchong had shown some interest in her, he had never truly taken her seriously. He did not even remember her name. The one that scolded Lady Shangguan last time? Young Master Su, did you forget? Lu Tianyu blurted out in shock. He had purposely tried to punish Morongzhen to please Su Lingqiang. If Su Lingqiang had no impression of the woman, it would be too boring. Oh, it's her. Su Lingqiang nodded as he collected his thoughts. He was still not interested. With his status and background, a mere Morongzhen was not worthy of his attention. However, when he recalled how she had scolded Shangwan Laner, he calmly agreed. That's good. Let her be. Out of sight, out of mind. As for continuing to deal with Morongzhen, Su Lingqiang had no intention of doing so at all, especially since this person was related to Elder Morong. Su Lingqiang did not want to do so. Fine. I thought you would at least be happy about it. Since you're not interested, forget it. Lu Tianyu shrugged in disappointment. He had no grudge against Morongzhen. He was merely trying to please Su Lingqiang, which was why he had decided to punish Morongzhen. Now, that young Master Su was not interested, it was pointless. With Morongzhen's indirect kinship with Elder Morong, with big shots like eldest Miss Shangwan and young Master Su standing in front of him, no matter how hard he trampled on Morongzhen, it was unlikely that Elder Morong would step forward to protect him. However, he was still an elder of the Soaring Sky Pavilion. Lu Tianyu was not stupid enough to provoke him for no reason. Initially, he had prepared a lot of tricks, but now, the woman had unknowingly dodged a bullet. As Su Lingqiang and Lu Tianyu were chatting, the door to the private room was suddenly pushed open, followed by a deep voice. It seems like I'm late, young Master Su. Hee, we're early. It's been a while. How are you, senior brother? Su Lingqiang smiled and gestured for the South Heaven Gate to take a seat. Southern Heavenly Gate and Yu Zhe exchanged glances with one another. After nodding at Lu Tianyu, they sat down opposite Su Lingqiang and Yu Zhe. This time, they were not paying a visit to a top expert like Shanghai Tianhua, so there was no need for them to be too nervous. The reason why the Southern Heaven Gate brought Yu Zhe along was because they were planning to use Su Lingqiang to pressure Hong Zhong, while trying to find Lin Air through other means. According to Yu Zhe's deduction, this Lin Air was very likely related to Welcoming Pavilion. Welcoming Pavilion Master Hu Yinfeng was Su Yuanjing's direct subordinate. The so-called direct senior brother in charge was the senior brother in charge of the disciples in the Gold Core stage who had officially been apprenticed. However, that position, not to mention him who had not reached the Gold Core stage, even those in the peak Gold Core stage would have to fight for it with their background. Moreover, if he was in the Gold Core stage, he would have been apprenticed to the Inner Gate long ago and become an elder's nominal disciple. Then, he would be a person who could shake the whole North Island with a stomp of his foot. The direct disciple of an elder was a world of difference from him, the eldest senior brother in charge. In the cultivation world, the direct disciple was almost the same as the son or grandson. If he could successfully apprentice, then he could be said to be the second or third generation of cultivation. Even if he wasn't as prominent as Su Lingqiang, he would still be someone who had the ability to attend all kinds of upper-class banquets. And if he could be apprenticed to Shanghai Tianhua, then he would be almost the same as Shanghai Laner. It wouldn't even be a problem for him to step on Su Lingqiang. However, Shanghai Tianhua rarely accepted disciples. Ram Jie could be considered as one of his nominal disciples. Of course, he was only nominal and not a direct disciple. However, was it that easy to reach the Gold Core stage? Before reaching the Gold Core stage, his position was still very useful. As for the so-called apprenticeship in the Foundation Establishment stage, such as Yu Zhe and Nan Tianyong, it was actually just a nominal relationship. It was similar to the mortal world recognizing each other as their godparents. In reality, the three great pavilions did not officially recognize it, but they would not stop it either. It was normal for cultivators to form cliques. Chapter 3863. All right. The Southern Sky Gate nodded in a deep voice. He was very clear that Su Lingqiang was only greeting him today. If he was sensible and took the initiative to give up, then perhaps he would be able to obtain some benefits. But if he wasn't sensible, then what awaited him next would probably not be anything good. Suppressing his unhappiness, the Southern Sky Gate calmly explained the situation to Su Lingchong. His words were no different than when he was talking to Shanghai Tianhua. The only difference was the tone. Pressuring Hong Zhong of the Hong Merchant Guild? All right, this young master will pass on these words to grandfather without changing a single word. However, whether or not he will agree to help is not something that you and I could decide. Eldest senior brother, you understand as well, right? Su Lingchong had a playful expression as he curled his lips. Of course, this matter is up to the third elder. The Southern Sky Gate expressionlessly nodded. For the sake of the eldest senior brother position in the soaring pavilion, this eldest young master, Su, had already begun to pressure him. He had now completely realized that there was no such thing as a good feast. Eldest young master Su had prepared a feast at Hongmen for him today. Then, apart from this matter, does eldest senior brother have any other matters that you need help with? I will be more than happy to oblige. Su Lingchong pretended to be polite. As long as the Southern Sky Gate asked him for more things, it would mean that he would have more leverage over them, which would increase his chances of forcing them to lower their heads. The Southern Sky Gate gave Yuzha a look. Yuzha immediately nodded and said, "Young Master Su, there's one more thing I need your help with. It's the same thing from last time. We want to know if Lin Air is hiding in the welcoming pavilion." "Lin Air? Didn't I bring you to see him last time?" Su Lingchong frowned. Last time, he thought the Lin Air this guy was looking for was Lin Yi. He thought it would be less troublesome to get someone else to do the dirty work. However, it turned out to be a complete waste of effort. "Young Master Su, the newcomer from the Blue Cloud Pavilion, Lin Yi, that you brought me to see last time is indeed not Lin Air. However, this doesn't eliminate the suspicion of others, especially those newcomers from Soaring Sky Pavilion and Profound Secrets Pavilion," Yuzha answered. Last time, when he was appraising Lin Yi, he also took the opportunity to observe the other new disciples of the Clear Cloud Pavilion, but none of them matched Lin Yi's description. Initially, he planned to observe the new disciples of the Soaring Sky Pavilion and Profound Pavilion as well, but he didn't expect that after Hu Yinfeng brought him away, she would immediately turn hostile and kick him out. Now that he thought about it, it was probably because young Master Su was unhappy that he had made a wasted trip. Hu Yinfeng was observant, and in order to curry favor with young Master Su, he naturally wouldn't be nice to him. After eliminating the suspicion of the newcomer of Blue Cloud Pavilion, the newcomers from the Soaring Sky Pavilion and the Mysterious Pavilion also became a lot more suspicious. Although the old men did not seem very likely, there were exceptions. "You mean you want to go to the Welcoming Pavilion to investigate again?" Su Lingchong looked a little impatient. Since Lin Yi was not the Lin Air that this guy mentioned, then this kind of thing did not benefit him at all. He did not have the patience to continue wasting time with a small character like Yuzha. "That's right. This matter is very important to us. Please help us, young Master Su." Yuzha looked sincere. He loudly requested. "If that's the case." Su Lingchong looked at the expressionless Southern Sky Gate, then said, "Since eldest senior brother has appeared, this young master will definitely help you with this small matter. This young master will write a letter to Hu Yinfeng. After you go there, ask him to try his best to cooperate with you. Also, you can ask Kong Ming Ming for help. He should have a better understanding of the newcomers." "Thank you, young Master Su," Yuzha hurriedly said gratefully. Southern Sky Gate stood up and cupped his hands towards Su Lingchong. He cupped his hands towards Su Lingchong and said, "Since the discussion is over, if young Master Su has nothing else, then I will take my leave first. Eldest senior brother, take care. I won't see you out." Su Lingchong nodded calmly. Seeing that Southern Sky Gate and Yuzha left, Lu Tianyu, who was at the side, said, "Why do I feel that Southern Sky Gate is stubborn and doesn't want to give in to you, young Master Su?" Su Lingchong snorted. He had expected this. No matter what, he is one of the 3 heroes of the Nan family. He has some background in Middle Island. He won't give up such an important position like the eldest senior brother supervisor so easily. I'm just greeting him today. Next, I will teach him a lesson. I believe he is a smart man. What if this guy doesn't know what's good for him?" Lu Tianyu asked curiously. Although Su Lingchong was the young master of the North Island, Southern Skygate was not weak after all. He was strong enough, and above him was the leader of the 3 heroes of the Nan family. He even had a background in Middle Island. If the two of them really fought, it would be like Mars colliding with Earth. Doesn't know what's good for him? Then I will beat him up until he knows what's good for him. The position of the eldest senior brother supervisor is very important to my future development. Even if I have to pay a huge price for it, I will not hesitate. Su Lingxiong was determined to get it. Haha, then I really hope that Southern Skygate will be more strong-willed. Our Soaring Sky Pavilion hasn't had a good time for a long time. Chapter 3864. There will be a newcomer challenge later in the afternoon. It'll be convenient for you two to observe, but I have to say something first. If you two really find Lin Air, it's best to ask the disciplinary hall to step in. Don't make things difficult for me, Hu Yinfeng warned solemnly. If this Lin Air was really a member of the Welcome Pavilion, then no matter how deep the hatred between him and the Southern Skygate and Yuzhou was, as the pavilion master of the Welcome Pavilion, Hu Yinfeng couldn't just sit back and do nothing. Unless the disciplinary hall stepped in, then they could take him away. Pavilion Master Hu, don't worry. I know what I can do and what I can't, Southern Skygate nodded. All right, I still have some matters to attend to, so I'll be taking my leave first. If you two have any questions, feel free to ask Deacon Kong. Before Hu Yinfeng left, she called Kong Xiaoming over to greet the two. Thanks to Master Su Lingxiong's care, Kong Xiaoming was doing quite well in the welcoming pavilion. Even in the newcomers challenge competition, which was his weakest point as an alchemist, he was able to handle it with ease because he was ahead of the other newcomers by a large margin. Among all the newcomers in the Rising Sky Pavilion, only Zhong Pingliang was stronger than Kong Mingming, and Zhong Pingliang couldn't make things difficult for Kong Mingming under Su Lingxiong's orders, so Kong Mingming was doing quite well. Maybe after a while, the other newcomers in the Rising Sky Pavilion would ask for elixirs through their own channels, and they would be able to break through to Foundation establishment very soon. At that time, even with Master Su's care, Kong Mingming might not be able to stand out like he was now. But at least for now, Kong Mingming, was in charge. After listening to Southern Sky Gate and Yuzhi's intentions, Kong Mingming suddenly rubbed his chin and said thoughtfully, Senior brother Yu, are you sure that he isn't the Lin Air you're looking for? Of course, why do you ask, Deacon Kong? Yuzhi asked curiously. Kong Xiaoming pretended to be profound. Actually, I've heard about Senior Nantianyong. Actually, the technique that Lin Air used. It is very similar to a move that this little brother knows. I wonder if the two of you have heard of the pill firebomb that only an alchemist can use? Coincidentally, Lin E is an alchemist. Pill flame bomb? The Southern Skygate and Yuzhou were both stunned. Although they had never seen this martial skill with their own eyes, as the name suggested, this was a technique that used pill fire. It was not strange that only alchemists could use it. However, alchemists were notoriously weak in actual combat. How could a single Dan firebomb be so powerful that it could instantly kill Nan Tianyong, an expert at the peak of the late stage of the Foundation establishment stage? Attacking a rookie from the welcoming pavilion without permission was not a light crime if this matter were to blow up. Furthermore, they were only suspecting Lin E. They were far from confirming it. If they were to test him rashly, wouldn't the price be too high? Southern Sky Gate could see Yuzhi's dilemma and immediately said, I'll bear the consequences for you. Hurry up, don't waste time. At this moment, there was no one around. However, if they waited for a while longer, when the rookie challenge was about to begin, the other rookies would probably walk out of the cave abode and gather. When that happened, there would be no chance to test him. Without a choice, Yuzhi could only summon up his courage and touch the restriction of the first cave at the foot of the mountain. A moment later, Lin E opened the door and couldn't help but be stunned when he saw Yuzhi standing in front of him. Could it be that my identity was exposed? Lin Yi's heart couldn't help but skip a beat. This was his first reaction, but then he felt that it was a little strange. Even if this guy recognized him as Lin Air, with his little strength, Would he dare to come looking for trouble so openly? Even if the Southern Sky Gate personally came, he wouldn't dare to attack him in broad daylight, let alone a mere middle-stage foundation establishment stage inner disciple, right? Daring to attack a rookie from the welcoming pavilion in the cave abode of a rookie, the disciplinary hall would be the first to punish him. Chapter 3865. At the same time that Lin Yi was in a daze, Yuzha was also in a daze. In the instant that the door opened, this Lin Yi really did look a bit similar to the Lin second in his memories. However, the similarity was only in his stature and temperament. His face was completely different. After staring blankly for a moment, the two of them came to their senses at the same time. Lin Yi immediately said warily, "What business do you have with me?" Lin Yi purposefully asked in a very vague manner. He wanted to test whether or not the other party had seen through his identity. Also, what was he planning by suddenly appearing here today? Yuzha sized up Lin Yi. Just now, in his daze, Lin Yi did look a bit similar to the Lin second he was looking for. This discovery made him overjoyed. But now that he was staring at this completely different face, the more he looked, the more he felt that it didn't look the same. This made him rather confused. Could it be that because he had been too excited just now, it was all just an illusion? Yuzha felt a bit disappointed. But whether or not it was true, just looking wasn't enough. He had to see the results of his test. "Come with me. If you don't want to come, you can try," Yuzha said in a low voice, then turned and left. Lin Yi couldn't help but frown. This guy was just as he remembered. He really was crafty and difficult to deal with. He had wanted to test him, but he had thrown out such a brainless sentence. He couldn't get any useful information out of him. But why did this feel a bit like the situation in a school in the mortal world where the senior students would call out the junior students to teach them a lesson? Looking at Yuzha's back, Lin Yi couldn't help but laugh. He followed without hesitation. It didn't matter if the other recognized him or not. Facing a mere Yuzha, there was nothing to be afraid of. For the sake of the Star Inkstone, it wasn't just Yuzha who had racked his brains to find him. How could Lin Yi not want to find a chance to silence him, even though it seemed a bit risky? But there was no reason for Lin Yi to let go of an opportunity that had been delivered to his doorstep. He still had a fatal weakness in his hands. Not to mention the fact that Yuzha was alone. Even if he called the Southern Heavenly Gate over and used this weakness at a critical moment, he would definitely be able to protect himself. Silently following behind Yuzha, the two of them walked for 2 miles. They walked to the foot of the mountain where the other rookies would not notice for a short period of time before stopping. "You can tell me now, can you? What do you need from me?" Lin, he looked a little nervous. Of course, this was all an act. On the surface, he was just an early-stage foundation establishment cultivator at the Blue Cloud Pavilion. Suddenly being called out by Yuzha for no rhyme or reason. It would be abnormal if he wasn't nervous at all. "What is it?" "Don't you know what you've done?" Yuzha laughed coldly. He knew that the Southern Heavenly Gate was definitely watching from the side, so he didn't dare mention the word Star Inkstone at all. He might as well use words to trick Lin Yi. "Huh? What did I do?" Lin Yi's face was full of confusion. Then, as if he had suddenly realized something, he said, "Could it be that you were called over by Meng Jueguang to deal with me? Last time, Yuzha had appeared with Su Lingchong and the others. This was something that anyone could see. So when Lin Yi asked this question, from the perspective of a normal Blue Cloud Pavilion newcomer, it wasn't out of place at all. Meng Jueguang? What kind of nonsense is that? Yuzha was instantly stunned. He didn't know about the conflict between Lin Yi and Meng Jueguang. But last time, when Meng Jueguang introduced Lin Yi to him, he really didn't say anything nice. The two sides didn't get along. This was something that was obvious. Come to think of it, he, Yuzha, was a dignified inner sect disciple of Soaring Sky Pavilion. Moreover, he was a middle-stage foundation establishment expert. That Meng Jueguang was only a new manager from Blue Cloud Pavilion. What ability did he have to trouble you, Yuzha, to personally help him? Didn't Meng Jueguang ask you to come? Then why did you call me out? Lin Yi pretended to be surprised. Asked by Lin Yi, Yuzha was a little hesitant. If he had been able to use his words to trick the other party into revealing some clues, he would not have felt any psychological pressure. However, judging from the other party's reaction, there were no flaws. He was just an ordinary blue cloud pavilion newcomer. This was going to be difficult. After all, from Yu's point of view, even if what Kong Ming Ming said was true, even if this Lin was really an alchemist and knew how to make the pill fire bomb, the possibility of this guy being Lin Air was already very small. For this small possibility, was it worth it to take such a huge risk and attack a newcomer from Welcoming Sky Pavilion? As Yu Zhe was hesitating, the South Heaven Gate's voice suddenly appeared in his ears. Tell the kid that you're going to kill him. Then, don't waste your time talking to him. Attack him right away and watch his reaction carefully. Yu Zhe was shocked and subconsciously looked around. After he came back to his senses, he forcefully restrained this impulse. The Southern Heavenly Gate was not in his line of sight. The reason why he could hear this sound was because he had used the 1,000 Li True Qi technique. Of course, although it was said to be 1,000 Li, the actual effect could not be so exaggerated. However, a few Li was not a problem. Also, this technique had an advantage. After locking onto the target, only the target could hear the sound, but the surrounding people would not hear it, even if they were less than 3 meters away from the target. However, Southern Sky Gate had forgotten one thing. If he didn't want to expose his identity in front of Yu Zhe, he couldn't use any of the martial techniques that he used in front of him before. Frenzied Fire, 8 trigrams palm, Frenzied Fire Fist, Butterfly Subtle Steps. These were the martial techniques that Lin Yu was most familiar with. Otherwise, he would be immediately seen through by Yu Zhe. This was the most difficult part. Facing Yu Zhe, a middle stage foundational establishment stage expert. Not only did Lin Yi reveal his true strength of the early stage foundational establishment stage, he couldn't even use all of the martial techniques that he was proficient in. Falling into such a sorry state, it was easy to imagine. Fortunately, although Yu Zhe had killing intent, he did not use his true strength. For example, if he was only using the 21st form of the fatal consecutive sword, although Lin Yi was having a hard time dealing with it, it wasn't to the point where he couldn't hold on. After 2 to 3 exchanges, he saw that although Lin Yi was doing his best to dodge and maneuver, his 21st form of the fatal chain sword still left several wounds on his body. However, Yu Zhe's killing intent weakened a lot when his own fatal consecutive sword, 21 forms, left several wounds on his body. At least, from the performance of these few exchanges, this Lin Yi and the Lin Air he was looking for were 2 completely different people. Words could lie, even looks could lie, but once they really fought, especially when facing the threat of death, fighting style wouldn't lie. Even if one wanted to purposely hide their martial techniques, when facing danger, the body would subconsciously react. This was an instinct that couldn't be controlled. And the stronger the cultivator, the stronger this self-preservation ability was. This was also why the stronger the expert, the harder it was to be ambushed and killed. Because even if one numbed their will, it was very difficult to fool their self-preservation instincts. This was originally a good thing, but for the current Lin Yi, wasn't necessarily a good thing. Because if this continued, he wouldn't be able to hold on for much longer. In reality, this was indeed the case. After just a few exchanges, Lin Yi already couldn't control the restless physical energy in his body. If Yu Zhe persisted for a while longer, he might not be able to control himself. But at this time, Yu Zhe suddenly stopped. I have no grievances with you. Why do you want to kill me? Don't you know what the crime of attacking a newcomer of the Welcoming Pavilion is? Lin Yi panted in a sorry state. There was an element of pretense here, but he really had a hard time pretending just now, and there were many wounds on his body. This wasn't fake. Don't talk nonsense. If you want to live, then try using your pill firebomb. I'll give you this chance. Yu Zhe said with a cold expression. Pill firebomb? Lin Yi was instantly shocked. He didn't know that in the end. Little did he know, he had fallen into their trap. The Southern Sky Gate and Yuzha were both smart people, and smart people were extremely suspicious. Yuzha would not have placed the suspicion on Kong Ming Ming. After all, strictly speaking, Kong Ming Ming did not look like Lin Air. However, after what happened, it was impossible for the two smart people not to suspect him. Furthermore, this guy really did know how to use the pill firebomb. Lin Yi really wanted to give Kong Ming Ming two phrases. One was to go for wool and come home shorn. The other was to be caught in one's own trap. By the way, how did you guys find your way here? Lin Yi asked as he healed himself. He turned his head to ask Xiao Ran and Xiao Honkai. Although this place was not far from the newcomer's cave in the Blue Cloud Pavilion, under normal circumstances, no one would come here. Furthermore, judging from Xiao Ran and Xiao Hongcai's expressions, it was obvious that they were here to look for him. Xiao Ran and Xiao Honkai looked at each other and said, "Actually, that woman told us. She asked us to come and collect your corpse." Morongjin? Lin Yi was startled. He then remembered that when Yuzha came to look for him, although the other newcomers were in the cave and could not sense what was going on outside, Morongjin lived in a small wooden hut outside. Even the slightest disturbance would not escape her eyes. However, after what happened last night, this woman was obviously on the opposite side of him. If she allowed him to be killed by the Southern Sky Gate and Yuzha, wouldn't that be exactly what she wanted? Although her words were not pleasant, it was obvious that she wanted Xiao Ran and Xiao Honkai to help him out. What was she planning? Could it be that she still had not given up on him? Lenny could not help but feel confused. He could only sigh. Women were really hard to understand. They made enemies out of nowhere, but in the blink of an eye, they would help him out of trouble. It was really confusing. However, he was sure that she did not have good intentions. "Boss, do you think that woman has really taken a fancy to you?" On the way back to the cave, Xiao Honkai chuckled with a face full of curiosity and gossip. Currently, in the eyes of the Clear Cloud Pavilion's new disciples, the most eye-catching person was undoubtedly Morongjin. Each and every one of her movements affected the minds of the new disciples. Even someone like Xiao Honkai couldn't help but pay attention to her. Ever since Morongjin's appearance yesterday, although her every frown and smile was very attractive, she did not show much passion towards the newcomers. Only when she was with Lin Yi was she different. She seemed to take the initiative. If they were to find out that Beauty Morong had taken the initiative to go to Lin Yi's cave to take a bath, they would probably go crazy. Lin Yi rolled his eyes at him and curled his lips. "What do you like about me? Strength or background?" Xiao Ran and Xiao Honkai were momentarily at a loss for words. Although their boss, Lin Yi, was definitely unfathomable. In terms of strength and background, at least on the surface, he was not as strong as Beauty Morong. At that moment, Morongjin suddenly appeared in front of the three of them. She smiled coldly at Lin Yi and said, "I thought you didn't know how to appreciate favors. However, it seems that you do know your place. You're right. Whether it's strength or background, in my eyes, you're the same as trash. Therefore, I advise you to be more sensible and make a wise choice. This beauty's patience is not that good." Choice. Lin Yi raised his eyebrows. "Lady Morong, I've already made it very clear. Well water does not interfere with river water. This is my choice." Xiao Ran and Xiao Honkai exchanged glances with each other and nodded in agreement. Although they had yet to understand Morongjin's true intentions, they could feel that the newcomers in Blue Cloud Pavilion were about to get lively. "Let's go. The challenge is about to begin. Let's see what this woman is going to do," said Lin Yi to the two with a smile. Due to Morongjin's participation, the situation had suddenly become complicated. Although Lin Yi was still confident that he could deal with these people, he could not afford to be too careless. Otherwise, if he was not careful, he might actually fail miserably. On the other hand, after Yuzha failed to test Lin Yi, he immediately returned to the Southern Heavenly Gate side. He told the Southern Heavenly Gate everything that had just happened in full detail. Although the Southern Heavenly Gate must have seen everything from the beginning to the end, Yuja was the one who had actually fought against Lin Air, while the Southern Heavenly Gate did not even know what Lin Air looked like. Therefore, Yuja had the biggest say on whether or not this Lin E was the Lin Air they were looking for. After listening to Yuja's detailed description, the Southern Heavenly Gate fell silent for a moment, before saying, "Just tell me one thing. Is this Lin E the Lin Air we're looking for?" Martial Uncle, although he looks similar at first glance, he's actually two completely different people. During the fight, just now I almost killed him a few times. If he really had the strength of Lin Air, he wouldn't have been able to hold himself back in the face of death, replied Yuja in a deep voice. If it was said that this guy clearly had great strength, but in order to hide his identity, he would be too stupid. It was impossible for there to be such a fool in this world. If he lost his life, then what was the point of hiding? What he didn't know was that other people would fight back when faced with death, but Lin, he had the art of dragon mastery, which allowed him to quickly recover. Even if he was beaten half to death, he would still be able to recover. Furthermore, Xiao Ran and Xiao Hongsai's sudden appearance helped Lin E out of his predicament. The Southern Heavenly Gate nodded slightly. His opinion was similar to Yuja's. Although he had never truly interacted with Lin Air, he knew that all experts had their own pride. If this Lin E was really an expert who could instantly kill Nan Tianyong, then without the Southern Heavenly Gate's appearance, he would definitely not let Emir Yuja act so presumptuously. Overall, this Lin E is just an ordinary newcomer. He's just a little stronger, but he's nowhere near Lin Air's level. Furthermore, according to what Meng Jiawang said, this guy is a poor bastard without any spiritual jades. Think about it. How could a poor bastard like him catch the attention of an old fox like Hong Zhong? Yuja continued. Chapter 3869. Although Kong Ming Ming was the same as Lin E, and his appearance was completely different from the Lin E they were looking for, this alone couldn't completely eliminate the suspicion. Otherwise, they wouldn't have tried to test Lin E again. Putting aside his appearance, Kong Ming Ming was more suspicious than Lin E in every aspect. First of all, he was a disciple of Soaring Sky Pavilion, and he had the backing of a young master like Su Lingqiang. Whether it was his background or strength, he should be above Lin E in theory and closer to the image of Lin E. Secondly, if he wasn't Lin E, why would he rack his brains to divert the attention of the two people and pour dirty water on the irrelevant Lin E? If it was purely for personal revenge, why didn't he say that he knew how to use the pill fire bomb? If you want to know if Kong Ming Ming knows how to use the pill fire bomb, that's easy. Use the same trick you used on Lin E on him again, and the truth will naturally come to light. Southern Sky Gate sneered. Martial Uncle, that's not good, right? Yuja was shocked. To be honest, he had already taken a big risk by testing Lin E just now. If he had been seen by Xiao Ran and Xiao Hongkai just now, he might have had to go to the law enforcement hall to turn himself in. Now, Southern Sky Gate actually wanted him to test Kong Ming Ming again. One had to know that Kong Ming was a new deacon, and his status was much higher than Lin Yi's, an ordinary grassroots newcomer of Blue Cloud Pavilion. Behind him was young master Su Lingqiang, and once something went wrong, it wasn't something that Yuja, a mere inner disciple of Soaring Sky Pavilion, could handle. Southern Sky Gate frowned in dissatisfaction. I will bear all the consequences for you. What are you afraid of? If you shrink your head and feet, you won't be able to achieve anything. Yuja couldn't help falling into a dilemma. Although Southern Sky Gate's words were domineering, the other side was still young Master Su's subordinate. If they really angered young Master Su and caused the situation to escalate, not to mention Southern Sky Gate, even the head of the Nan clan's three heroes, Nan Tianba, might not be able to handle it. At that time, the first one to suffer would definitely be him, Yuja. However, Yuja was coveting the Southern Sky Gate's lesser, phaseless magic art, and he was counting on the Southern Sky Gate to help him find Lin Air. Therefore, he couldn't wait to please the Southern Sky Gate, So why would he dare to go against their wishes? If he were to test Kong Xiaoming, then he would be putting himself in danger. But if he were to go against Southern Sky Gate's will, then it would make Southern Sky Gate feel bad for him. Southern Sky Gate was a smart and sensitive person. After that, it would be very difficult to correct it. At that time, he would probably not be able to rely on a minor phaseless god technique anymore. Who knows, there might be some unexpected gains. Yes, Yuja followed behind Southern Sky Gate with complicated thoughts. At this moment, he was thinking about a problem. When the newcomer competition ended, what excuse could he use to continue pushing it away? Even though he knew it was a very risky pit for a smart person like him, even if Southern Sky Gate forced him to, he definitely wouldn't jump into it easily. However, Yuja never expected that this difficult problem that he couldn't solve even after racking his brain would be solved by Kong Ming Ming of his own accord. The reason was simple. Kong Ming Ming, in the following newcomer competition, was forced to use the Pill Fire Bomb. There were so many newcomers in the Soaring Sky Pavilion. Although they all expressed their willingness to take care of Kong Ming Ming after receiving young Master Su's orders, the newcomers who were able to enter the Soaring Sky Pavilion all had a decent background. Even if they weren't as arrogant as Su Lingchong, they were still the second generation. None of them were truly docile. Even among the newcomers in the Blue Cloud Pavilion, Lin Yi was an anomaly. The newcomers in the Soaring Sky Pavilion were even more confident. Naturally, there were many troublesome newcomers who were dissatisfied with young Master Su's arrangements. Of course, not all newcomers with random backgrounds dared to ignore young Master Su's tyranny. Therefore, regardless of how they felt in their hearts, for the past 2 months, most of the newcomers in the Soaring Sky Pavilion were quite cooperative with young Master Su's orders on the surface. Chapter 3870. The newcomer who challenged Kong Ming Ming this time was called Yuda. Although his background was not very powerful, with the help of the elders in his family, he had just found a powerful backer. He was the nephew of the second elder of Soaring Sky Pavilion. Although this young master was not as powerful as Su Lingchong, the grandson of the third elder of Soaring Sky Pavilion, he was still powerful enough. He was definitely not afraid of Su Lingchong. As a result, the dissatisfaction that Yuda had suppressed in his heart for more than 2 months finally burst out in an instant. To be honest, Kong Xiaoming was just a newbie from the common world. His strength wasn't even close to the word strong. If it wasn't for Su Lingchong looking after him, he would have been nothing more than a piece of shit in the eyes of the newbies from Soaring Pavilion. They were already being generous by not stepping on him. But because of young Master Su, they had to pinch their noses and lift up Kong Ming Ming. They had to watch this scum of the secular world ride on their heads and act like a tyrant. What kind of bullshit feeling was this? Aggrieved, after holding back for more than 2 months, Yuda finally found the confidence to openly confront Su Lingchong. He could challenge Kong Ming Ming in the newcomer challenge without any fear. This was not only to vent his anger, but more importantly, it was also to express goodwill to the nephew of the second elder. It should be known that Su Lingchong was extremely ambitious in the circle of the second generation of the Soaring Sky Pavilion, and many second-generation young masters were quite dissatisfied with him, and one of them was the nephew of the second elder. Now that Yuda had taken the initiative to challenge Kong Ming Ming, Su Lingchong's little brother, it was a show of loyalty. Once he succeeded, he would definitely be appreciated more in the future. As for strength, although he was still at the peak of Heaven's stage, taking the initiative to challenge Kong Ming Ming, a master at the early stage of Foundation establishment, seemed to be courting death, but it was not impossible because Kong Ming Ming was an alchemist who relied on constantly taking pills to barely reach the early stage of Foundation establishment. One could imagine how weak they were. Even a Heaven stage great perfection expert like Yuda might not necessarily have no chance of winning. Think about it. In a highly anticipated event like the Newcomer Challenge competition, if the weak could defeat the strong and step on Kong Ming Ming, the early stage of the Foundation establishment realm, for the first time in history, how big of a sensation would it cause? Not only would he be able to vent his anger, but he would also be able to gain face for his new backer. More importantly, it was very likely that he would be able to leave an impression on the higher-ups of Soaring Sky Pavilion. What a great harvest this was! If Shiryuda still did not dare to stand up and challenge Kong Ming, then he would really be a newcomer of Soaring Sky Pavilion. Moreover, it wasn't as if he didn't have a trump card. Previously, he had taken a golden elixir. In this way, he could have the strength of an early-stage Foundation establishment cultivator for a short period of time. He was even more confident in dealing with Kong Ming. When he saw Shiryuda standing up with a sneer and taking the initiative to challenge him, Kong Ming was completely stunned. It was just as Shiryuda had thought. Although he was an early-stage Foundation establishment cultivator, if he really wanted to fight to the death, he might not be able to defeat a Heaven-stage Great Perfection expert. If he lost to Shiryuda, the Heaven-stage Great Perfection expert, then he, Kong Ming, would really be nailed to the pillar of shame of Soaring Sky Pavilion. People would not care whether you were an alchemist or not. They would only pay attention to one thing. You, an early-stage Foundation establishment cultivator, actually couldn't defeat a Heaven-stage Great Perfection expert. Not only would Kong Ming lose face, but he would also lose face. Even Su Lingqiong, the backer behind him, would lose face. At that time, it would be hard to say whether young Master Su would still take care of him like now. So this time, when faced with Shiryuda's public provocation, Kong Ming didn't dare to fail no matter what. Otherwise, if he lost young Master Su's care, who knew how miserable he would be in the future. What made Kong Ming helpless was that even if he was an early-stage Foundation establishment cultivator, facing an aggressive Heaven-stage Great Perfection expert, he really didn't have any confidence in winning. If he really let the opponent seize the initiative in the arena, even if he had an early-stage Foundation establishment cultivator's true chi, there was still a possibility that he would be suffocated to death in the end. The only killing move he was confident in was only one move, the Pill Firebomb. The power of the Pill Firebomb was needless to say. If he really forced it out, not to mention the opponent was a mere Heaven-stage Great Perfection expert, even an early-stage Foundation establishment cultivator of the same level would be killed in one move. However, the biggest flaw was that this move needed time to accumulate power, and the greater the power, the longer the time needed to accumulate power in advance. Normally, Shiryuda wouldn't give Kong Ming such a chance at all. However, for a cunning person like Kong Ming, it was really easy for him to find an excuse to delay time. I'm a newcomer deacon. If I directly accept the challenge and get injured, it is very likely that it will affect my duty to record and publicize the newcomer's points.